Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. I'll do housekeeping first. So I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I would advise those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode, and that all devices are muted, and remind anyone in the room it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I have an apology from Gary Middleton, and I also have just to note that both Kathy Mason and Cara Hunter are joining online today. So as usual, any issues with the connection, audio or the video, do let us know through the clerk and the team. And I think we have an apology from John for lateness. So that's that all out of the way, unless members have anything else to add there. No. So that takes us to item 2 on the agenda, and that is chairperson's business. So just as a first off, we have a big agenda today. We have quite a lot to get through before we get to our briefings in terms of legislation and the committee bill, and we also have three briefings in today, as there was an agreement to have the officials in on school uniforms, just given the timeliness of that. So I would ask members to just be mindful of time, and if we can try and keep contributions short and snappy, so we can get through the evidence without taking up unnecessary time. So other items of chairperson's business, a couple of records of informal meetings first. So we have a record in your packs, page 3 of table papers, of an informal meeting that was held with the Open University and the community participants in the Why Riot report. So I would just want to put on record it was a really genuinely very helpful engagement. So I would want to suggest that we do write and thank the participants for their contributions, and to offer them the opportunity to come back to us if they feel there is more detail, perhaps in public session engagement, that they think would be helpful for the committee. I think it crosses over a range of issues of interest to the committee, not least educational underachievement, but also then a clear link into effective delivery of youth services at community level. So I thought there was a lot to take away. Unless anyone has anything to add, are we content to agree that? Agreed. The next item then, we have a record of an informal meeting that was held just this week on Tuesday with Corleone and Gaelscoileachta, and that's at page 5 of tabled papers. So happy to hear views if anybody wants to add anything, but I would suggest that we obviously note all of that evidence for the SEN inquiry. The evidence heard was all SEN related, and I would want to maybe suggest at this stage that we do give consideration that in the recommendations coming out of the report, just given the very particular context and challenges of Irish medium schools, that the report, I think it would be appropriate that some of those recommendations do specifically reference any of the challenges that we heard about in relation to that this week. Unless members want to add anything, are we content to agree that? Agreed. Okay, so other bits then, this is moving on to some legislative issues to consider. So committee stage of the General Teaching Council bill commences today. So there is in your packs there's a draft timeline for the bill, and that's at page 9 of your tabled papers. Happy if members feel that they would like to hear any further sort of information or explanation from the clerk on anything in that, but I'm certainly content to propose that timeline for the committee stage of the bill, if that's agreed. There are other things to agree in terms of dates of committee stage, but in terms of the proposed timeline, are we content to agree that? Agreed. So we also have then at page 10 of tabled papers, we have a draft signposting advertisement in terms of a call for the draft call for evidence, then also at page 11 of tabled papers, and a draft list of stakeholders to be consulted with directly on the bill, and that's at page 12. Is everybody content with the signposting advertisement, the call for evidence, and the list of stakeholders? Agreed. And then at page 17 of tabled papers, we have a draft motion, which is extending the committee stage of the bill, or the proposal is that it would extend the committee stage of the bill to the 27th of May 2026. Just to speak to that very briefly, and yeah, I've seen that's there, that's grand, yeah, thank you. The date of the 27th of May is, I think, as we had similar discussions around the school uniform bill, there's probably less time sensitive material in this. 27th of May, absolutely, I don't think we would be suggesting that as a target by any means whatsoever. I think there is slack in the time scale that we may be able to reduce that. But I would just want to note, we've obviously got the committee bill in the mix. We have another piece of legislation from the department, the 16 to 18 legislation, which may land. We have certainly one, possibly two private members bill, which could all be landing in the same crossing over with this timeline, plus bringing our Senate inquiry to conclusion and the normal business of committee. So I think just building in slack, it makes sense, but that timeline as drafted there would allow the amending stages to run in the month of June to have it done by before summer recess, which I think is a reasonable time scale. But happy to hear from members, or if there's agreement on that.
Agreed, Sean.
I'm happy for you just to agree my private members bill. No
just nod it through, Danny. I'm not sure it works like that, so that's grand. We'll get that done. So I need to sign this. Is that right? Is that
please? Yeah. The motion for extension and that will go to the House.
And can I just check that will then be on the floor of the Assembly next week? Is that the plan, that motion? Or would that be after recess?
I think it's going to be after recess.
It'll be after recess,
yeah.
Okay. I'll leave that with you, thank you. Okay, so we then move on to the next item at Chairperson's business, and we will try and get through all of this as quickly as we can. There are page 18 of tabled papers. There are draft terms of reference for the proposed committee bill, and it also contains the proposed timeline for the bill. Again, I would add all the caveats. Absolutely not a target, but trying to be as realistic around likely timescales as possible. So if members can make sure that they just have that item of their packs open. Can I just check, you're wanting to speak to this obviously initially. Are we going to do that in closed session, do you think? Or
yeah, I think it might be useful just at this stage to talk about the framing of the objective, and members might want to take a closed session for that if everyone's agreed.
That's fine. So before then the clerk would speak to any of this in detail. Can I get agreement that we do move into closed session on this item and look for as short a time as possible? Members are agreed? Agreed. Okay, members, that's us back into open session. So I'll just ask the clerk to summarise the actions agreed in that closed session, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Okay, so members considered as draft terms of reference for the committee bill in relation to trousers at school, and slightly reframed the single legislative objective of the bill to make provision securing the right for pupils to wear trousers to school if they choose. No matter the school, and the committee also agreed to consult on this objective from the 12th of December until mid-February.
I think also an agreement that we would have survey questions agreed at next week's meeting. They'll come to next week's meeting. Yes, no, that's perfect. Okay, so that takes us on then to the final item in Chairperson's business, and I apologise, there's been a lot to get through in this, and it is just to remind members that next week's meeting will be the final meeting before Christmas recess of committee, and that Parliament buildings will be closed then until Monday the 5th of January. Are members content to agree that committee packs for the meeting for the 7th of January will be issued on Monday the 5th? I know that is a little later than usual. Are members content with that? Agreed. Okay, moving on to item 3 then, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they need to make for any items on today's agenda? No. If that should change, as usual, please indicate so they can be noted. And then item 4 is matters arising. Do we have any matters arising? Michelle, do you want to come?
I wanted to raise something. We have a session next week from Transform Ed, and a big part of that will be around the curriculum reform. So I think there's a relevance here because the subject working groups are starting to meet on the curriculum. I just happened to have met with a load of people this week who keep raising the curriculum with me and concerns around maybe the pace of it and some of the direction of travel. So one of the key things coming through would be a direction of travel, people concerned that they're really just cutting and pasting the Michael Gove reforms from England. There has been an English curriculum review that's just been published, which would question whether that is an effective way to close the attainment gap. We haven't heard anything from skills groups, so we're looking at a new curriculum that will perhaps give better test results, but are we actually giving kids the skills they need to go into the workplace? So I think we kind of need to look at those kind of aspects as well. They're also in these kind of the working groups that are coming through. There are concerns perhaps that it's kind of a fait accompli what they're doing, that there's a direction travel again that's just going to be imposed, and what is coming through is being led. So there's concerns around maybe the reading list for the working groups that looks at Michael Gove's reforms, really looks at the curriculum review and the department's response to that curriculum review. So again, I guess not really challenging any of the things that have come through as it is right now. So again, just wanted to reflect. It just happened to be this week. There was about 3 or 4 meetings and everybody kind of raised this with me, so I felt it was relevant to raise it at committee today, especially in light of what we're doing over the next week or so. So I think if we're looking at challenging or looking at scrutinising the curriculum stuff, perhaps we could get some people in to specifically look at some of these aspects. So I'm thinking around Becky Francis, who did the review in England. It would be good to hear from her, at least to hear even written evidence in terms of that review. I think there's also people perhaps from the Skills Council, again, just to see how this curriculum stuff is lining up with that wider picture around skills. So it's just to give this a broader scrutiny than just a segment within a Transform Ed briefing. So if at some point we could look at that in more detail, I think it would be really beneficial.
Yeah, I think we do have Transform Ed in next week, and there's a lot in that. So again, it's difficult to see how we could scrutinise each sort of aspect of that plan in detail. Look, I'm certainly would be in agreement that there's more work to be done around the curriculum review. Would the best approach, if members are agreed, be, Michelle, for you to forward some of those specific contacts to the clerk to factor into forward work planning then for the new year, if members are agreed on that? Agreed. Not hearing any dissent. Okay. So that moves us on. I've noted nothing else in matters arising. So item 5 is draft minutes. I'd refer members to the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 26th of November. That's at page 8 of your packs. Can I get agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings?
Agreed.
Agreed. Just get those signed and then we'll move on to our first briefing. Thank you. Okay, so members, item 6 on the agenda. So it is, feel free to bring the officials through there. It's an oral briefing from departmental officials on the school uniforms guidelines and allowances bill. So we have a briefing from the clerk at page 16 and a copy of the school uniforms guidance at page 17. So there is also a spreadsheet comparing the guidelines with the undertakings which were given during the amending stages of the bill in relation to those guidelines. So members will want to refer to all of that. We have joining us today Shirley Sweeney, Head of School Uniform Policy Team within the department, and Margaret McNaughton, Director of Transport and Food in Schools in the Department of Education. So look, you're both very welcome here at committee today. We were keen just to really hear the departmental input on the guidelines, as obviously they are the outworking of the bill which has just passed. We've had discussions around these guidelines in the round for a long time, so now that we have them available, we did want to have a chance to just look at them in a little bit more detail. So we thank you for your time. I don't know how much of a presentation you intend to make today on the guidelines, but I'm happy to hand over to you for any initial remarks that you want to make. Say up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer from there. So over to yourselves to begin with then.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about the school uniform guidelines. These guidelines issued to schools on the 12th of November and were shared, I think, with the Education Committee later on that day. They follow not only the bill, but detailed letters from the Permanent Secretary in September 2024 and again in October 2025. The October 2025 letter specifically stated that it was of particular importance that schools ensure they don't publish uniform requirements in their prospectus that don't align with the requirements of the bill. So once the bill receives royal assent, we will be reissuing the guidelines, and they'll go to grant aided and independent primary and post-primary schools. And at that time, we'll be able to confirm to these schools that the guidelines are statutory. So at the moment, they're still non-statutory. The duty on the manager of the school to adhere to the guidelines will apply the day after the bill receives royal assent. In terms of how the guidelines evolved, we worked on draft guidelines throughout the bill's scrutiny, and the first set of draft guidelines were produced in relation to the bill as introduced, not with any assumption that it wouldn't be amended, but rather to ensure that once the bill passed final stage, a set of guidelines would be ready for schools in order to assist them. So that first draft was tested with a group of school principals and was shared with the Departmental Solicitor's Office. Both sets of feedback indicated that a greater level of clarity was needed, and advice from our DSO was particularly helpful in terms of how the guidelines could be structured. That advice led directly to the layout of the guidelines, which have now been issued. So these guidelines differ very substantially from that was originally envisaged. The first draft followed the existing non-statutory guidance approach, setting out information across a wide range of areas in the form of written text. But these guidelines that have now issued to schools, they're structured differently. They provide much more focused information. So this recognises that the guidelines are there to give effect to the requirements in the final bill, and that they need to provide clear information for schools in terms of what's required of them. The bill requires certain matters to be provided for in guidelines and places the duty on the manager of the school to adhere to them. The guidelines themselves are what the schools must follow in relation to the school's uniform policy, both in terms of how it's devised and what it can require of parents and pupils. So the committee will be aware that there are 16 guidelines. They're all numbered and then followed by supporting explanatory information provided in the format of what this means. That information is to assist schools who are responsible for ensuring their policy adheres to the guidelines. In turn, the guidelines cover what the bill requires them to include, as well as a range of other information the bill enables them to include. Any cap will be consulted on to make sure that unintended consequences are avoided and that a cap is both agile and effective. We're currently writing up this consultation, and we're at the stage now where we are considering the questions that need to be asked as part of that, and then we need to take a decision about the timing of that consultation, particularly coming up now to school holiday periods. So out of the 16 guidelines, 15 are written in terms of what the manager of a grant-aided school must do. The other guideline, which is number 9, states that schools should support the lending of uniforms to pupils. At this stage, requiring schools to lend uniforms may generate costs that the department doesn't wish to insist upon, especially given the financial pressures facing the education system, including schools. The bill requires the guidelines to cover consultation, reviews, unfair cost aspects, comfort and practicality, nature and adequacy of uniform relating to the curriculum. That's for example, play-based learning, affordability and accessibility, including value for money, lending uniforms, use of clothing banks, multiple suppliers, and publication of information. And the bill also enables the guidelines to cover particular factors for uniform policies to take account of, transitional arrangements, what the department considers is reasonable or unreasonable, restricting the numbers of branded items, placing a cost cap once Section 5 is commenced, and it allows the guidelines to differentiate between schools and pupils depending on year groups. We've included an introductory section explaining the legal duty in schools to adhere to the guidelines, and this section confirms that it remains a matter for schools to choose whether to have a uniform or not, but if so, what that uniform consists of, and it's clear that the requirements of the guidelines must be followed if a school decides to have a school uniform. So the Minister introduced the bill to address affordability of school uniforms, and this, as well as comfort and practicality, is therefore fundamental to the requirements schools must follow when devising or reviewing their uniform policy. I won't go through each of the guidelines. I'm sure you will want to go through those as you start questions. But I'll just say that in addition to the guidelines that are written, in addition to that, there'll be the consultation on the cap, which, as I've said, we're already finalising. We're also working on monitoring arrangements, and we're intending to use an electronic method for collecting school level information, which will provide information in a format that we can analyse. Additionally, the information we seek is being aligned to the information required to be published by a school, just to keep it manageable. And any information required on top of this will be to ensure the department has the information it needs for the triennial report to meet the requirements of the final bill. In terms of what the guidelines will mean on the ground, logically we consider that a school will set out its rationale for the uniform items it wishes to include in its policy, alongside the costs of each item and where the uniform can be purchased from, noting that any agreement with a supplier needs to demonstrate value for money for parents, then consult its parents, pupils and anyone else the school considers relevant. It'll finalise its policy based on that consultation and publish this information alongside any other requirements of Guideline 12. The guidelines ensure that affordability, comfort, practicality and more underpin each school's uniform policy. The bill ensures that any school found not to be adhering to the guidelines can be directed to do so. What we're therefore looking forward to seeing is the positive impact the guidance will have for families who are struggling with the cost of school uniform requirements. So I'll pass over to you now, and I know you will have questions.
Thank you, Margaret Rose. I probably have just two things. There's a lot we could ask, and I'll ask just two things that I probably want to cover. One of them is around just the timings around this, and I know I feel I've rehearsed this so many times, but it still remains unclear to me. It feels to me there's two legislative requirements or two statute requirements that are maybe pulling against each other. There's the date that schools need to get their policies published in prospectuses, and then there is the requirement to adhere to this legislation. Now, at the point, as far as I can tell, that schools will be publishing those prospectuses, this bill may not have royal assent or may only just have received royal assent, so it would afford schools no time to do all the things you would need to do a revised uniform policy, consultation, engagement with suppliers. Suppliers, as far as I understand from engagement with them, have ordered their stocks. Suppliers are telling me if a school approaches me now to say their policy's changed, we're in trouble because we this is, in terms of our ordering cycle, we're done. So how does that work? If a policy then goes in that isn't compliant with these guidelines, but the guidelines at the point it was published, which is also a legislative requirement for schools, if it didn't have legal effect at that stage, will the department be directing schools to say you need to now go back and revisit this policy? And how do you do that at this point in the school year and the cycle of prospectus publishing?
Well, the first thing I would say was that was the purpose of the letter that issued in September 2024. We were very clear in
Margaret
that letter.
Just to come in, but we didn't have guidelines at that. We now have guidelines there. That's what has the legal effect.
That's right, but the letter itself actually set out what it was likely to be in the bill. And in terms of the very specific point about the suppliers, we had a specific section within that letter around suppliers. I can't find it here now, sorry, I'm just looking at the letter. It will be a legal requirement to offer a choice of more than one supplier unless evidence can be provided that a single limited supplier delivers value for money. Schools can take steps such as ensuring uniform items are readily available for a number of retail outlets, for example high street shops and internet suppliers. And then schools that buy uniform items to sell directly to parents should be aware that they have responsibility under consumer law as well. So they have known for the last year that this was coming along. I'm not aware that any of the prospectus has been published yet.
Some may have been, but I think that was why we've been keen in all the correspondence as well to flag that nothing should be published in the prospectus that would not align with what we anticipate. And you're absolutely right, Chair. I mean, until the bill gains royal assent, the guidelines are not statutory. However, I think the department has been clear to schools in all communications that this will now be in effect for 26-27 school year. The day after the bill gains royal assent, it is coming into operation, and the guidelines will therefore be statutory.
On that, I mean, I still maintain we are in a scenario where I think it feels unclear that schools are like, well, we must have something published by this date, but that doesn't give us enough time to actually do the work to change the policy. But that aside, and I know you have a different view with the earlier letter going out, I suppose that the question then would be, what work will the department do once we have got all those prospectuses published? Will there be proactive work to go and look at those policies and say, well, are we content these are compliant, or is it a sit back and wait and see if anybody raises a concern? It's just to get that. I mean, this is almost acid test first year. The Minister has made a big point that this will all be done by September 26 and we'll see the difference. Will there be proactive monitoring happening from day one about what's actually in these new policies?
I think our intention is certainly to look at the prospectus, but I wasn't expecting the prospectus to have all of the areas covered. I mean, our intention or our thoughts were that the prospectus will lay out the general school uniform policy for parents, but they have still got to do their consultation process with parents, because they certainly won't have time to do their consultation between now and is it sometime in January, I think is the final date for their prospectus. And some schools have already been consulting with parents over the last year. So yes, we will look at their prospectus to make sure that they haven't asked for anything that is absolutely not consistent with the bill. But it will only be as they finalise their consultation and they start to publish their policies online that we will then be able to start really monitoring.
Okay, well, we'll see how that pans out. The only other question I have, there are many things I could ask, but I want to make sure everyone has time. It's the status of some of the language in the guidelines. So the main outworking of the bill, I think we would all agree, was that guidelines would be created that schools must adhere to. So that's the legal impact of the bill. Schools must adhere to these guidelines. What do we do then about language in the guidelines that is framed differently? So we have a set of guidelines that schools must adhere to, but there's lots of reference to things that schools should do. What's the legal status of those shoulds in the guidelines? If it's something they should do in a document they must adhere to, do we just treat that as they must do this or not?
I think we did take legal advice throughout, and the language is very important because statutory guidelines differ from non-statutory guidance. However, the legal advice kept bringing us back to the language in the bill. So the bill, as you have correctly referenced, Sharon, sets out here are the powers, here's the duties, here's what must happen. It doesn't mean that every word within the guidelines has to be directive. The guidelines themselves that we will be looking to are those that are numbered with then explanatory supporting information below that. So there may be alternative ways between different schools, depending on circumstances, that they ensure uniforms are affordable for families on the lowest incomes and do not impose unfair costs. So that is the most critical, and that is they must achieve that. What we're not at the point of doing is saying to do that, you must. Yeah. So this is what we will be looking at when we are analysing adherence.
I mean, look at guideline 1 then as an example. So that's the one that just goes straight in at affordability. It sets out they must be affordable, so we're all in agreement. That's great that school uniforms, the policies must ensure uniforms are affordable. But then there are things that are in there that, again, schools seem to be able to pick and choose then, so that costs should be equitable across genders, so it should be equitable. And in terms of how affordability is measured, it talks about a whole range of different things that they may want to consider free school meal entitlement. They may want to look at other aspects of household income. There may be looking at the school uniform grant as a threshold. They may want to look at a 5% of household income. There's an awful lot in there that I think as a parent reading that, you might think, well, I'm not really sure how this is going to be set, and it's affordable for who or for whom. I'm sorry, my grammar's wrong, but it's just that concern of schools seem to now have a huge amount of latitude of just assessing what they think is affordable, because all of that's just very much in the you might want to consider, but overall you must ensure they're affordable. And if we're not clear what affordable means, which is a discussion we've had for the whole way through this process, I'm concerned parents are left with very little certainty. Potentially schools are left with very little certainty of how they're meant to be defining affordable.
If you go back to the glossary, lower income households is defined, and it is defined in the context of eligibility for free school meals. So that where those references are throughout the guidelines, that's what that means. It's looking if it is affordable for the families who are eligible for free school meals, then logically it is affordable for the remainder of the school. I suppose
then the other side to that then is if it is not affordable for a lower income household, if it is assessed that it is not, then that would be in the space of a direction being issued. Is that right?
Ultimately,
they haven't met guideline 1.
But
guideline 1 is clear. This needs to be affordable for lower income households as defined in the glossary, which is that free school meal entitlement category. So if that is demonstrated not to be the case, then schools would be in breach of these guidelines.
That would be the assessment that we would undertake in relation to the bill then, Clause 8 and the power of direction, and go through the steps that are in that, including engaging with the schools to obtain their views. But yes, and committee will be very familiar with the fact that the department is required to give a direction if the school is found to be materially not adhering, and affordability was the reason the Minister brought the bill forward, so that is a material point.
I think it's very important, and schools will be concerned about making sure that they get this right, and parents will want to be assured that schools will get it right. I think that clear position that this is about what is affordable for lower income households, as clearly defined in the guidelines. I think we will want to keep a very close eye on how that actually rolls out, because currently my assessment of many school uniform policies would not meet that threshold, so I hope to see that will change. We shall see. I'll pass over to the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, can I say that many of us were totally underwhelmed.
Deputy Chair, if I could just also ask members to indicate through the clerk now for their indications.
Many of us were totally underwhelmed when we eventually saw the guidelines, but I want to take you back to just before the summer when the committee was scrutinising the bill, and you appeared in front of the committee a number of times, told us that the guidelines were imminent, we would have them the following week, we would have them within days, and in a private meeting with us you told us that when we saw the guidelines we would realise there was no need for amendments. So I'm just wondering, was it genuinely your intention to provide the committee with the guidelines?
I think I have, as you say, been here a number of times. Yes, at that point in time, I thought, yes, we can provide the committee with our draft guidelines. At that point, I hadn't shared those with any of the schools. I hadn't shared them with our departmental solicitors. And I think I did say that one of the reasons why they weren't forthcoming at that time is because I wanted to share these with the schools. When those came back, it was really, really clear that first draft of the guidelines were, they were not going to be of any help to you in scrutinising the bill.
How did you know that, Margaret Ross?
Pardon?
How did you know that?
Well, because what we have now is completely different, and from what we had originally drafted. What we had originally drafted was just based on the current non-statutory guidelines, and at that point I wasn't aware that when you're writing statutory guidelines, that it's a very different language that goes into it. That you have, those guidelines have to stand up in court.
But so, is it not the same issues? Is it not about affordability? Is it not about equality and so on? So, for example, in the guidelines you were drafting, was there anything in it about the right of girls to be able to wear trousers, or any issues around equality? Were they ever in your original guidelines?
Not that I can remember. We had nothing as specific as that. We didn't even have anything actually in it about what a lower income household was. So we couldn't have.
But let's stay on the issue of equality for girls. Did you not think it was important to have that in your guidelines?
We didn't put anything as specific as that into the guidelines that I can remember, because I'm going back to the first draft of these.
Why did you think, and you got sight of the amendments that we were proposing, and one was about giving girls the right to wear trousers, and even at that point you didn't consider that it should be incorporated into the guidelines that you were drafting?
At that point, I suppose our view was that there is no barrier in the bill to schools offering girls the option of wearing trousers. It's still there.
We're talking about giving girls a right, not giving schools an option to decide whether they will allow girls to wear trousers or not. But you never considered that.
I think all the equality legislation, as we said, it does apply. The annex to the existing non-statutory guidance would set that out. You will see that it's reflected as links, etc., in the annex to the guidelines. So the broader equality pieces, I think we always felt were there, and there was that was still reflected in the very first set of draft guidelines. So, that, but the detail of, it was never the department's intention to start being so prescriptive to schools. And I think through the assembly stages, the minister has said, there's a balance there in terms of the autonomy of schools to decide their uniform, whilst ensuring that there isn't that barrier.
Should there be a balance in terms of equality?
Well, equality legislation applies. Where we see this working, though, in practice, Deputy Chair, is that the consultation process, the pupils will be asked, here's the rationale for the uniform, comfort, practicality, the adequacy to support learning and play-based learning and outdoor learning, all of those aspects, all of that. And the pupils will have the opportunity then to say, well, we wish to wear trousers, all of which will be published.
And the committee is bringing forward its own bill for giving girls the right to wear trousers. But just, Margaret Rose, you said you didn't give us the guidelines because you knew they would be of no use to the committee in their scrutiny. If they had been of use, would you have given them to us?
So if they had been?
Yeah.
But if they had reflected properly, I think, what was...
No. Let me just repeat the question. You said you didn't give us the guidelines because you knew they wouldn't be of any use in our scrutiny. I'm asking you, if you had believed they were of use in the scrutiny, would you have given them to us?
Well, I mean, at that point, I would have been going through the normal processes then within the department, and I hadn't asked the minister if we could.
Okay, let me just stop you, because you're saying you didn't give them to us because they would have been of no use to us in our scrutiny. Now, the minister has said, and he actually mocked this committee at the consideration stage of the bill, and both of you were sitting in the chamber at the time, as far as I can recall. He mocked the committee, saying that the committee was never getting sight of the draft guidelines. Did you hear him saying that?
I don't know.
Brief response, and then we'll draw a line.
I think the position is, Deputy Chair, that the guidelines were more complicated, but the sequencing in terms of sharing or not sharing with the committee, at the point where we had, in genuine good faith, and there was no, just to be clear, there was absolutely no intention to mislead anyone, but at the point where we thought we would share them with you, they hadn't been tested, we hadn't asked for the Minister's view, and the Minister's view, as he clearly stated in the chamber, was the guidelines follow the bill.
Just a final comment here, Chair, thanks. Although both of you told us that we were going to see the draft guidelines, you told us that we're imminent, we'd see them within days. It's now absolutely clear that we were never going to see those guidelines because the Minister stated it clearly in the chamber. So anyway, thanks for your evidence today. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. John, you had indicated.
Yeah, a couple of questions, thanks. Question one's around coats, because it's something I get a lot of questions from constituents about. I asked the Minister about it the 15th of November. The guidelines 3 and 6 say that pupils should be allowed to wear a non-branded generic coat to school. Then on the non-statutory guidelines, it also reiterates that, but says it's non-statutory, which kind of almost confuses issues for me rather than actually provide extra reinforcement. But can we just ask one straight question first? As it stands, is there a right in legislation under the guidelines for every pupil to wear a non-branded generic coat to and from school when it's raining?
Well,
that's a yes or no, because
when the guidelines come into operation, all pupils should be permitted to wear.
Line, as if we're in a judicial review here. The school hasn't done it, and I'm going to say to you, point me where the school must do it.
Well, I think then the terminology of reasonable and unreasonable is what comes in there in paragraph 45. The department considers it unreasonable for a school to limit the outdoor coat a pupil can wear to one which is branded, including school specific. So it's the terminology of reasonable and unreasonable, you may be aware, has sort of a legal context,
Wednesbury principles,
Wednesbury reasonableness. So that is where that's specifically referenced at the outset for schools, that, you know, this has a particular meaning, it has a particular weight, it's part of clause 2 within the bill, that we can determine and set out what is reasonable. So it is unreasonable. So that would be Wednesbury unreasonable.
It's not, because the Wednesbury unreasonable test is what the man on the Clapham omnibus, the reasonable man on the street, would say.
Yeah.
Whereas this is what whoever's drafted the guidelines has said, and what the judge has to say. And it's a high barrier for unreasonableness, is to say the school who's entitled to make their own decision will then say, well, you have to show that that decision is unreasonable. Not that another option was reasonable, but that was unreasonable. The second limit for judicial review is that it's unlawful. And that is where, if these guidelines say that a school shall or must permit a pupil to wear a non-branded coat. So we're setting ourselves up for a situation where currently the school can say no. The parent would have to demonstrate that that school was acting unreasonably, which is an incredibly high threshold, because the judge has made clear many times in judicial review, even if I think it's unreasonable, it's not, even if I think there's a better choice, it has to be demonstrably unreasonable. So why can the guidelines not simply say a school shall ensure that every pupil can go to school and back in a non-branded coat?
I think that is the intention. I mean, we can.
We're talking about law here. We're not talking about a non-binding motion.
No.
So let's give clarity for the because I'll be putting this on TikTok later on, right? I don't mean that in any. I want to say to pupils and parents, what is the legal position? Because this has spent a long time being drafted, and I'm no wiser now. So, can a pupil go to school in the rain wearing any form of coat?
That is the intention of that guideline, yes. Yeah, and we have clearly said, as Shirley said, that the department would consider it unreasonable for the school to say.
Well, the department's choice. If it goes to, I mean, if the school refuses, and we've got a different minister.
That's where the power of direction would come in. We would make an assessment about whether the school was
just make it clear
material.
in the legislation. So when parents are sending children to school, whenever these come in, that it's clear. I mean, I don't understand why in legislation we have doubt when we can have certainty. Very easy to write, every school shall require that every pupil can attend school wearing a non-branded item of uniform. That is very simple. And instead we have two references to it, then a reference to it in non-statutory guidelines that leaves people scratching their heads saying, well, I really don't know. Do you get my point?
John, you've made your point.
I've made the point.
No, very clear. I was conscious you said you had two questions, and I'm just aware.
Well, actually, I had 7, but I'll not
if you want to get a second one in, it would need to be now. But the point has been very clearly made.
Shoes. Has shoes been incorporated in the calculations of what constitutes a reasonable school cost of a uniform?
Shoes forms part of the definition in the bill of
They're separate,
specific styles. So if that is referenced in the context of specific styles, meaning of clothing and styles, so clause 10 references to clothing include footwear.
Yeah.
So, yes.
What is a reasonable cost for shoes?
Well, we have, in the earlier part of this year, we did some research into the costs of uniforms generally across a number of high street stores, but fairly well-known high street stores, as well as some what would be considered probably the cheaper brands, and also then another school uniform supplier. And within that, I have them here. You can get from a very well-known a high street shop, you could get a total boys uniform, excluding shoes at this point, for £90, and you can get a total girls uniform for £93. That's at the higher end of those high street stores. You then add shoes onto that. So that brings you probably 140, 150 pounds, depending on the price of the shoes.
Just going to ask,
So-
invite John for comment, and then we will need to move on to the next member.
We'll stick with that. I had some other questions, but I'll follow them up with AQWs to the Minister.
Sorry,
I had some other questions, but I'll follow them up with AQWs to the Minister.
Okay.
We ran out of time. But thanks for we established that there isn't absolute clarity on the school coats, because it is a very unseasonable climate we live in, and I
Potentially
certainly
after
wouldn't go to
at
work.
the end of this item, we can, if there are
Thanks.
further questions, we can see if they can be if we can. Sorry, Danny, just through the chair. If you do have further questions, it might be something we could bring. No, sorry, it might be through the committee. We could raise those questions in writing with the department, so we can feed that back at the end of the session. I mean, I have to say, I mean, I would agree with much of what John said in relation to these guidelines. Felt like an opportunity to deliver certainty. It was a clear imperative. You must adhere. And then there are areas, where we heard clear evidence on things like coats, and that clarity doesn't seem to be there. So I think it will be a disappointment to a lot of parents watching, unfortunately. Michelle, you had indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. Nice to see you again, ladies. We spent a lot of time there a few months ago. It's a similar, I guess, lines of questioning that John has picked up on others in terms of the opportunity here for certainty, that parents are not going to sit and read these guidelines. They're just going to want to feel an impact in terms of what they pay for school uniforms. One of the things that came through strongly in our evidence was around PE kits and branded PE kits. I am worried that some of what's in this was going to create a divide within schools and between pupils. So if we look at line 49, it allows primary schools to have branded PE kits as long as they are optional. But if the majority of people in a classroom decide to take up that option, and there's kids then who don't, there's a sense they'll be being singled out because they can't afford that school PE kit. Do you understand that would be what that would create in terms of the classroom?
Yes, I understand the point you're making there, Michelle. Yes, but
you could have just ensured there was no PE kit in primary schools, but you opted not to do that.
well, I think again it's trying not to be too directive at this point until we see that is there an actual issue there in terms of. I mean, the evidence was that branded PE kits, yes, there's some creeping in at primary school, but predominantly it's post-primary is where that has really been a very large cost issue for parents.
If you look at post-primary then, you've said the schools should keep branded items to a maximum. You've also said that it's unreasonable for any school to require a large number of branded items. So what's a large number?
We haven't defined a large number because...
it could be 10 items.
Well, I mean, it could be 10 items, yes, but in the paper that we're doing on the cap, there is the question in there, is it cap on the number of branded items? Is it a financial cap or is it both? So, we would be able to be more definitive once we have the consultation on the cap completed and the results in it. So, that's why at this point we're not able to really just define what a large number would be, but in general terms, probably anything over 3 or 4 items would be considered to be, a large number of items.
I think part of the reason for that as well is looking at, I mean, earlier in the guidelines it states that, what we will be looking at here is the cost to parents. So if a school chooses to have a large number or a number of branded items, but is bringing in a subsidy or is operating on a lending basis, so that is not a cost to the parent. So it's trying to balance out allowing the school to operate its uniform policy whilst ensuring that it isn't at a cost to the parents. And yes, but we have also stated, this doesn't preclude us defining large numbers of branded items in future guidelines, which is also the benefit of the guidelines in that they are more agile. And if that becomes apparent that there is a big issue with schools trying to require parents to pay for a large number of branded items, then we can
understand the
change
concern with the vagueness of a lot of this and the whole way through. It's not certain, and there seems like, I guess our concern was always that there would be schools who are minded to do this well and to consider affordability sincerely, and others who really aren't. And I'm not sure that this will tackle that. If we can look at again at the costs, so like the key cost that usually comes through is the cost of the blazer. So what would you expect the maximum cost for a blazer to be now? This affordability was the key thing around this. So what's the guidelines going to do in terms of what you would consider reasonable or affordable in that context?
Well, again, if you go back through what we have, the research that we carried out, and there are blazers available at, again, quite very popular high street brands. Blazer of £34.
That would be what you see as a maximum.
Well, no, I wouldn't. We wouldn't be putting a cap on that at the moment. So we wouldn't be saying it's a maximum for a blazer. It's the overall cost of the entire uniform that.
It's just not clear when you're going to step in and say someone's in breach of guidelines. There's so much latitude here for schools and so many grey areas. It's very hard to see when you're going to step in. I mean, if you look again at reasonable, what would the reasonable amount be for a primary school uniform? Have you given any thought at all to what these figures would look like across the piece, and not just looking at individual schools? Some of it looks at, it says about 5% of a monthly income. If you've got a school where parents have a high income, that's not very helpful to kids on a lower income. It's just there's a worry throughout this that there's an opportunity here, I think, to create some stigma, and I think the lack of clarity means that the schools who want to do what they want to do will continue to do that, and that you don't have any kind of sense of those kind of figures around reasonable for a primary school uniform in particular. It just means that I'm not sure how much this is going to have or could possibly have an impact on affordability, which is what the whole thing we were told repeatedly was about.
Just the officials just to respond, and then we'll move on to the next member.
I think as we gather the information, as schools publish their policies and we gather the information, up to now we have not had clear data available to us to tell us what each school charge or what the costs of a school uniform are for each school. As we gather all of this data, we will be much clearer on what costs are associated with each school.
Very quickly, the bit at the back which caught us all when you took these guidelines, practical ways for schools to reduce uniform costs which are not part of the statutory guidelines, just felt really kind of affronting. If this is the stuff that's practically going to reduce costs, it's really hard to understand why it's not in the actual guidelines, but I leave it there.
Could I just quickly respond?
No, please respond to that. Yeah.
Just
briefly,
one sort of point you were making previously, the lower costs, the cost of 5%, that's all set in the context of lower cost households, so it is relating to those, not to the general, because also we're mindful that this needs to address, prospective parents and pupils, not just those parents. It's also guideline 20 is, I was struggling to find it earlier, but it does set out there shouldn't be a material difference if options are available, because yes, we are mindful of any visible difference between pupils having more uniform kit than others. So
But the back felt slightly like trolling. Here's all the stuff you really could do to make costs lower, but we're not going to put it in the guidelines. Just felt like, why even put it in there at all? You could make people do this, but anyway, that was just a personal bugbear when I saw the guidance. So,
thank you, Michelle. So, Danny, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you. My first question is a quick yes or no. Just to follow on from Pat around the guidelines. Did the Minister intervene at any time to say that we couldn't have the guidelines?
I hadn't asked the Minister at the time. I had said that you're going to get the guidelines. I hadn't even asked him at that point. So,
no, but at any point, because we were getting reassurances from yourselves that we were going to get them, and then that sort of went on. It wasn't just once. That was said there's a number of times by yourselves. You came in that they'll be imminent and weak, and so the Minister at no stage stepped in.
And not on those earlier stages. When I'd got
at
all
any
the
stage did the Minister step in and say we couldn't have a few of the guidelines?
It wasn't a case of you can't have them. It was more a case.
Well, that's fine. If he didn't intervene, that's fine. I just want the clarity on that. That's 100%. See, just going on the affordability side of it, I'm just, really contradicts the evidence that we took sitting here through the whole bill. But even the work that I done myself in West Belfast, if I went from schools from one corner to the other, just a blazer alone, there was no blazer at £35. They actually averaged between £80 and £145.
Is that for a
blazer
with
alone?
A crest?
Oh yeah, blazer with a crest. Yeah, that's what the school requires. The school requirement is that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the figures that we have.
Your figures are saying £35. That's some difference.
That's not a blazer with a crest. That's a plain blazer that you can then have a sew-on crest.
But the schools don't allow that.
But the point now is that they have to consider those.
Have to consider it, but they won't do it.
But then they have to prove to us that they have ensured that their uniforms are affordable for families on the lowest income.
Our amendments that we brought forward would have mandated for that. But yet you said in this committee that once we seen your guidelines, there'd be no need for our amendments. So this is again boiling down it. So we could be sitting here this time next year and the cost of blizzard. And by the way, my work that I done myself in West Belfast isn't like all that bad compared to some of the evidence we heard. We've heard some schools in Belfast are charging blazers well in excess of £200. Some uniforms going as high up as £800. But the bog standard average all in with PE kits and extracurricular and all that was coming in around £300 to £400 and excluding lots of children from all aspects of education. So this time next year, September, we will have no guarantees that the cost to a uniform will be anywhere near affordable.
The guidelines do require that the school must provide a rationale for any branded items it wishes to include and consult specifically with the parents and pupils on that. And again, that consultation has to come back to the lower income households.
So what's affordable? So what should we expect if I'm going to buy uniforms for my children next year? Should I expect to pay what I paid? I'll just use my daughter as an example. I paid close to £300 this year. Should I be paying £100 this year then?
I mean, if you look at the lowest income household for any of the schools, and from my memory, every single school has at least 1% of free school meals. So even if you take the figure for free school meals threshold, which is 15,390, I mean, 5% of that is something like £64, and then when you add the uniform grant onto that, you then have. I can't add this up on 87.60 plus your £64. So that brings you up to about 150 odd pounds. So that would be a reasonable figure for a uniform.
Whole uniform. So I should be expecting.
It's a generic, but remember, it's not. You're not. Schools cannot be asking in those cases then for woolen blazers.
Some of the blazers have nice wee.
I know.
Stitching. Margaret, that's not going to change. I'm not going to name any schools, but I can guarantee you that's not going to change one iota. Not with your guidelines, not with this bill.
They're going to have to show that they have met guideline 1, that their uniforms are affordable for families on the lowest income.
So what happens if that there's nobody in free school meals at a school then? Does that go up?
I've that per hearing. What happens?
So if you don't have anyone on free school meals at your school, does then that change what you interpret as affordable?
But at the moment, every school has at least 1%.
I'm just throwing that out there.
We also have the definition doesn't relate it to in an individual school. It's lower income households is eligible for free school meals.
Okay,
it doesn't have to be within that school.
Okay, so I know the time. So this time next year, schools should not be charging anywhere near £100. Saying at me, I'm lowballing this, £100 for a blazer alone. That should not be happening. So if I stand next June and they're all coming out and you're going to school and you're standing there, I can take a picture and say the minister is guaranteeing that this will only cost £34.
Just to let the officials respond to that, and then we'll move on to the next.
The overall cost of the uniform has to be affordable. So if schools choose to have a higher cost blazer and lower cost trousers, shirts, skirts.
The blazer alone's £150 and I'm lowballing it.
Sorry, what?
£150 in my constituency. It's just for the blazer.
But just for there are generic blazers available for how much?
Okay, I don't think you're getting the point here, Margaret Rose.
We'll move on to the next member. So Kathy, you've indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much. Guys, can I just ask, do you wholeheartedly believe that the current guidance is going to secure the right of girls to be able to wear trousers as part of their uniform?
The guidance certainly, nor the bill provides any barrier to schools, providing that option.
But I'm not asking about the schools, Margaret Rose. With all due respect, I'm asking, do you believe that it secures the right for a girl to be able to wear trousers to school?
it's not as I mean, it's not as clear as that in the guidance or in the bill, but when schools are carrying out their consultation, I mean, if girls feel really strongly about wearing trousers, that needs to be brought up. If parents feel really strongly about the girls being able to wear trousers, they need to bring that up as part of the consultation. Schools need to explain then why, if that has been, you know, a big issue for them during consultation, why have they not taken that on board, taken those views on board? And it'll be the same for any other aspect of the uniform.
So would you accept that a school still can, even with this guidance in place, a school still can, as part of their uniform policy, not allow girls to wear trousers?
I think it would be very strange for them to take that.
Well, it's not strange at the minute.
No, but there's no statutory guidelines. With the statutory guidelines, all of this information will need to be published, including, and it specifies, you know, the consultation engagement, how that was conducted, what the outcome of that was. So there would need to, it all ties back, I think, to the rationale. What would be the rationale for a school to turn that request down from a girl? Because it will be published. Schools are competing for pupils, and it doesn't.
But they could still provide a rationale, and ultimately a girl would not have the basic human right and the equality to be able to wear trousers. Would I be right in saying that?
But is that rationale reasonable or unreasonable? I mean, what is the rationale for not allowing them? If there's a significant...
And who's going to decide whether it's reasonable or not reasonable?
But that's for the department to decide the reasonableness.
So you mentioned there earlier about the equality, the links to the equality stuff. I think it was never, Pat, you have links in the guidance to the equality legislation.
Yes.
Was that in the guidance previously?
Information about all of the equality legislation was previously in the guidance, yes.
So that was in the guidance that was there previously for schools, and there are some schools that still chose to ignore that and make part of their uniform policy that girls had to wear skirts.
That's in the current non-statutory guidance, but there are many other things in that current non-statutory guidance that schools choose to ignore, and you know that's the reason why we're down this route of trying to put it on a statutory footing.
Yes, but there's still nothing statutory within the guidance that's going to ensure that girls can wear trousers to school. That's what we're ultimately saying here.
Well, you know that it's not on the face of the bill, and it's not, you know, specific in the guidelines.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. David, you indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wasn't going to come in, but just I think it's worth exploring because I think elected members, understandably, have sort of focused in on the idea of a cap and a number, and they want a number to say it's not going to cost any more than this or that. It was explained just, I think, through the committee process that particularly whenever there was an effort or you know, seemed to be an effort to look at trying to put that into primary legislation, that's a difficult thing to do and shouldn't necessarily be done. There's an argument that it could be done in guidelines, but can you talk about some of the challenges that putting a number down brings? It would have to be dynamic because, you know, an item might cost something, as we've seen in the last few years, something cost something this year, but next year that could have went up significantly. So, you know, there's going to have to be flexibility in that. And it sounds to me, and you can speak to this, it sounds to me like you are doing work and research to try and come to that, which I think everyone would say is that's good practice in terms of making sure if we're bringing forward, we're going to put numbers down even in guidelines, that's properly researched and reflects reality, rather than, I think there's a temptation for elected politicians to want the number to be able to put up on TikTok or Facebook or anywhere else and say this is what we've achieved. That's not how policy making always works. I think you can probably speak to that.
I do think there is a real danger of putting an actual number in legislation. First of all, it's not easy to change it. That is going to, you know, the figure is going to change year on year. Part of our consultation document will try to address that very issue about how flexible we can be, how do we set that rate, who sets the rate, first of all. We will have, certainly within the first few months of next year, when the uniform policies are published on the school websites, we will have a much better understanding of what the costs of each of those uniforms are. And that alone will give us a very good indication of the reality of some some of the costs there. But again, it'll depend on whether or not the schools have actually started to adhere to our guidelines. There'll still be some costs, presumably reasonable or quite high. And if they are, then that we wouldn't be taking those figures into account on this. We will be going for the the average costs of those reasonable items that they have asked for.
But at an early stage as well, I mean, the department received legal advice to say we need to be very careful not to stray into competition law, and the Competition and Markets Authority, I know the committee heard evidence from them as well through the committee stage. We're very clear with us that the most effective way to keep costs down is open competition. So we need to make sure it's the unintended consequences and the risk of those, and the impact on events on the other side of the world in terms of costs. That it's very as policy officials, we are not going to be able to predict the price of fabrics and shipping and all of those things sitting here today. So it's making sure that the consultation is the place to sort of unpick some of that information and see what people's views are, and it is about making sure that whatever is in place makes a difference and can be adapted if it is found to need to change.
I think we're all wanting to go to a very similar outcome. I think it's just, I think we shouldn't lean in to the fact that something appears simple on the face of it and can be communicated much easier in that way, but actually when you look underneath, it's very complex. And I think you've outlined some of those issues. I mean, we were talking about school shoes earlier, and I understand school shoes can be very expensive and often left out of it. But a quick search, and there are types of school shoes, black school shoes there for under tenner. That'll be similar with other items, but there will also be a choice there, and some people will choose for quality reasons, for other reasons, to go for branded or better quality and so on, and you can't stop that. That's the nature of the market. But there are options out there that allow people to keep the costs low, and I think we need to understand that too. Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
David. We don't have any other indications, so that I think brings this item to a close. There may be issues that members want to pick up for further correspondence. Look, thank you for your time today. Appreciate this is very early days with the guidelines. I think we will be wanting to keep a very close eye on how this pans out. What do school uniform policies look like on the other side of royal assent for this bill? So no doubt we will be hearing from you again, and we thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Members, so before we move on to the next item in the agenda, is there anything in terms of specific follow-up? I think certainly a very close watch and brief around how this pans out is going to be required from the committee. Is there anything specific at this stage we want to be raising? John, I know you had mentioned there were things you wanted to pick up and didn't have time. If that can be done on written correspondence in the committee, we can
I'll
do
send
that.
the questions in.
Okay, okay, that's fine.
Thanks.
Okay then, members, that takes us on then to item 7 on the agenda. So we have just getting the seating set up there. So we're very pleased to have the Children's Law Centre here with us today, and they are providing evidence on the committee's inquiry into SEND provision and the transformation agenda. So please feel free to come forward when you're ready. So I would refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 55. We have briefing papers from the Children's Law Centre, and that is at page 57 through to 90, and page 24 of your table papers, and the briefing and table papers is the briefing that was specifically provided for today's session, if members want to refer to that. So in terms of introductions, again, if anybody wants to add anything to their job titles or any corrections, feel free to do so. But I've got Rachel Hogan, who is the Special Educational Needs Representative with the Children's Law Centre. We have Kathryn Stevenson, Solicitor, Head of Legal Services at the Children's Law Centre. Liam Mackle, Advice Manager at the Children's Law Centre. And Diane Hammond, Legal Advisor at the Children's Law Centre. So you're all very welcome today. Some of you familiar presenters to committee, others it might not have been been here so regularly, but we are very glad to have you here today, and I think your evidence today is really important in input in terms of your role and where you sit within the SEND system. It is really important that we do hear from you. So I'll hand over for any initial presentation of up to 10 minutes, and we are, as is normal, running behind schedule, so again, just ask members as well to work with me around just timings of getting to questions as quickly and succinctly as possible. But over to yourselves. Rachel, is it you opening?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. And we're delighted to have the opportunity to contribute to the SEND inquiry. We think it's a really important piece of work, and that the committee has made a very valuable contribution to scrutinising this, which helps us in our work in advocating for children with special educational needs. I just wanted to let you know how much experience you have sitting here with you today. We've all been around for a while in the Children's Law Centre. There's good staff retention. So you've got 82 years of combined experience sitting in front of you today, and the majority of that has been focused on special educational needs. In the last reporting year, SEND Law accounted for 70%, over 70% of all the education queries raised with the Children's Law Centre, and SEND Law made up 50% of our entire advice service, and we cover all children's rights. And this has been a pattern, and I'm sure you would also see that in your constituency work, that a very large proportion of queries coming in are about special educational needs. We also find, as well as the volume, there's the complexity of these cases that come to us. They're very difficult to resolve these days, just because of the lack of resource and specialist capacity in the system. So in terms of the DE and EA transformation processes, the question we have really, has anything changed, and is anything going to change? We think that there's significant potential for positive change, and we are very, very concerned to make sure that that happens, and that we don't miss this fantastic opportunity of all working together to try and make this system the best system that it can possibly be in Northern Ireland. We have the benefit that the legal duties are really clear in the existing legal framework, and that it's a robust and fit for purpose framework, and we know from reports that it is the operation that needs transformed, more so than the legal position. It took decades for the SEND system to slide into preventable chaos, and we, over our 82 combined years, have sat and witnessed this system slide into complete meltdown, where it wasn't fit for purpose at all. And we were interested to hear the EA's session last week, where they've tried to tell us a little bit about the work that they're doing to turn this around, and it's no small feat. There has long been an urgent need to align the capacity of children's special educational support services with the level and type of presenting needs. The crux of the problem over the past 2 decades has always been that children couldn't access specialist support services when they needed them, and that problem remains the case today. So despite quite a number of years of transformation, many meetings, advisory groups, reference groups, processes and reviews, we haven't moved forward at this stage. I have included in the briefing paper that we provided to the committee, which will be published on our website for anyone who wants to look at it, a comparison between the old SEND pipeline, or the current SEND pipeline, and the new pipeline. And if you look at those side by side to each other, I think you can see very clearly that there is very little actual difference in the processes that occur. So firstly, the child gets school provision, and then the next stage up might be that they get a PLP in this new system, and then they will hit a gatekeeper of some description before they can move to statement. In the old system, the educational psychologist was the gatekeeper. In the new system, it's a referral for involvement form process, and an EA moderation panel is the gatekeeper. So you still have a gatekeeper ultimately. You still have got finite resources that have to be allocated. And I am absolutely flabbergasted to learn and to realise that there is flat funding allocated to local impact teams. The local impact teams are part of the crux of this matter because they provide early intervention. There used to be 8 separate services. They're now multi-discipline services within the EA. So in the midst of dismantling everything and trying to put it back together into these new teams, we find that this service has not been prioritised for additional funding, and so their capacity is as it was before. And if the capacity is as it was before and the complexity of need is increasing, which it is, then how can it possibly work is our question. That's our concern. And we really want to support the EA. We know that staff in the EA are working really, really hard to get this new system up and running, and we want to support them in that and the department. But this is a big, huge concern of ours. If they don't have capacity to match the service to the needs, we're just going absolutely nowhere with this, and children will end up statemented. You'll still have the high level of statements rather than the earlier intervention. At the moment, over the last decade, the proportion of children that have statements has gone from about 22% of pupils who are on the SEN register to 42%. So an almost doubling of the amount of children with statements within that pool of children who have SEN, which has stayed static at around 70-ish thousand, give or take, for about 10 years, without going into all the ins and outs of that. So what you can see is need has become more complex. Why? Our view is that the complexity of that need is very largely driven by unmet need at the earlier stages, which ends up pushing children into stage 3. Now, the Education Authority is going to want to start pushing children back towards stage 2, earlier intervention. And in theory, that is the right thing to do. But if you do that at a time when the capacity isn't there to meet that need, then you're taking children out of statements and into a system that can't meet their needs. And we must avoid that at absolutely all costs. And that is why this process is so important. The request for involvement form itself, we've been taken through this, and it's our view that the form and the process, once SENCOs would get used to it, in itself is relatively straightforward and well set out. There is exceptionality there, so that pupils, if they come along and they need a statement now, you don't have to jump through all the hoops. But in the vast majority of cases, there will be hoops to be jumped through. The difficulty and the concern around this process is that it's the evidence that must be gathered and how that must be gathered before you ever open up the portal and start entering the information. And we have compared in our paper again what the current Code of Practice requires and what is required under the Graduated Response Framework in terms of the evidence that has to be produced. And there are links there to what I can only describe as very lengthy tick box exercises that SENCOs might have to go through before they can get to the point of asking for external help from the Education Authority. We need to get away from a place where there's an abundance of boxes to be ticked and into a place where we'll have a child-centred, child-led process where needs are identified quickly and met. That's what the current system requires. The department's vision for getting the right support at the right place at the right time by the right person is exactly the vision in slightly different language that is in the current law. So there's absolutely no change in that ideal and what we want to achieve. Teacher workload is obviously a huge issue, and if we don't bring our teaching workforce with us on this, this will not be implemented properly, and we'll talk to that through some of the advice examples we can give you. We've outlined in our paper as well some of the positives of the EA local impact teams, in particular having the single point of referral, good audit trail, removing the educational psychology gatekeeper, maybe being able to implement better a team around the child approach and alignment with health trust areas, albeit we don't have health input at the minute. And more importantly, the increased focus on meeting the needs of SEN and including children who have SEN. The drawbacks that we're worried about is that potential to repeat the mistakes of the past by slowing the flow of children down the pipeline towards being registered as having special educational needs, getting support, and then maybe if they need a statement, having a statement. If we do the same thing that we did before, to echo what the Education Authority has said before in their evidence, if we repeat the mistakes of the past, we're going to get the same outcomes. And we really don't want to do that. So we have to do something different. To know whether it's different, we need full transparency about how resources are being allocated, what the levels of unmet need are, how they match up to the pathways of support, are there waiting lists, and how are those being managed, how are they being prioritised. In the past, there have been waiting lists and there have been ways of prioritising the oldest children first and things like that, or children with a statement first. I have asked on a number of occasions for the moderation handbook that staff are using to filter through these requests, and I haven't yet received it. I have been promised as of yesterday that I will receive it, and that's something that we would really welcome, that transparency. Open the doors, open the windows, and let us all really look in and help you as the Education Authority and the department to get this right, because that's what we want to do. Data is really important in that sense, and we think that data should be published, that we can see regularly, not with a view to batter the EA with the data, but to support them in improving performance for children and young people. We also need to see enhanced children's services cooperation, and we've outlined a number of interfaces with health. I won't list them now because we're short for time, but there are numerous interfaces with health, not just through LITS, but throughout the child's journey, from conception to development in the womb, preschool, nursery, through school, through secondary school and transition. There are numerous interfaces, and those need to be better managed and more coherent. Unmet need will obviously continue to escalate if it's left unchecked, and we won't see any change in the number of statutory assessments being requested and statements being produced. I just want to very briefly as well touch on the fact that if the system isn't right, we see lots of children out of school or on reduced timetables, and that is completely and utterly unacceptable under the law. That is breach of human rights to be denied the right to education. And the EA is failing there in its mandatory legal duty to provide other forms of education if the child isn't able to go to school for some reason. We have children out of school for years, and so will you as MLAs have the same problem. The majority of those children are disabled, so we're treating disabled children differently than we're treating non-disabled children, and that is fundamentally wrong. SEND provision is a matter of intense public interest. It is essential that the ongoing processes are subject to significant ongoing public scrutiny. And the success of reform will depend on significant and sustainable funding, transparent processes, enhanced cooperation between children's services providers, and a child-centred approach which promotes equality of opportunity for children with special educational needs. And if I can open the floor to questions, please.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all of you for your attendance and for the briefing paper. As always, really thorough and is a really good starting point for today's evidence session. Things that I was definitely planning to ask, and then when I started listening to your evidence, there were other things that I began thinking about, and that's always the challenge with saying really that it's such a big area, and so much is all interconnected. It's very hard to deal with any bit of it in isolation, so that has always been the challenge. I just wanted to sort of make an observation and just check that I understood it correctly, because I thought it was interesting. There's sometimes a narrative that there is an exponential rise in the numbers of children presenting with SEN, but your evidence today would actually suggest those numbers are quite static over the last 10 years. It's the number of children with statements, and we need to be careful with our language around that, and I think that was really helpful. That leads me then to a theme that has come through, I think, from EA evidence, which is very much that the direction of travel with transformation is that we should be trying to statement children less frequently and deliver appropriate early intervention sooner. What's your assessment of that view? I mean, you have referenced it in your evidence. I know from your legal perspective, you're always, if a child needs a statement, they should receive that statement, and that's their legal right, and I would absolutely concur with that. But could I ask for your assessment of that EA position around we should be statementing less frequently and providing appropriate interventions earlier as the means to reforming the system?
In a system that's properly resourced, funded and up to full capacity, that is absolutely the right approach. In a system that is not properly funded and up to capacity, there is an inherent danger in that, because you're taking children out of legally enforceable stages. If you've got a statement, you've got legal enforceability, and you're putting them into virtually unenforceable waiting list positions where you cannot actually pursue that help as efficiently. So obviously, if the system is working properly, early intervention kicks in. You get clear assessments of what the child needs early, their needs are met, and some of those children will not go on to require a statement. You'll always have a group of children who do require a statement. If the child needs it, that's what they should have, and the law provides for that, and they will have it because we have legal redress if that isn't done. But in order to move children into stage 2, you need to have capacity to meet their needs. Now, without having done that yet, we don't have capacity. And I think the evidence of the Education Authority was very honest, open and clear in that. They can't meet capacity, they're understaffed. They're looking for, I think, 48 more staff just to get to baseline, and they do not have the financial resources. And if we handed them a big pile of money today, they wouldn't be able to scale up quickly enough. So it's one of my questions around it, and our questions, how are they going to scale it up to match need? So I think we have to be very careful about moving children out of stage 3 in a position where we can't move them somewhere else? The answer is to create the pathways that they can go down. And I know that's the design of this system, but that's always been the design of the system. So what's changed in terms of capacity to meet needs is my question, and I don't see it.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. And then just to move that on the next stage, so definitely clear. And I think for me this session is really important actually, because you do as an organisation play a very key role within the system, and you're often that last line of defence when the system has not worked for children and families. So I think it's really good to get that on the record, that in principle your perspective is earlier access to pupil support services. Your briefing was clear on it, is absolutely what we need to be doing, and that if that means that a child then doesn't need a statement, that's okay. When a child does need a statement, they should have that right. In terms of that point when the statutory processes kick in and a child does receive a statement, we heard evidence from the EA that they feel there is a need for reform of those statements defaulting to one-to-one support from an adult as being the right thing to do. And we hear as MLAs that causes real anxiety among parents, because they feel that that's something that they've fought for in the system to get that support. But the EA were very clear that they think there is a better way to do this to ensure that children's needs are met. What's your assessment of where that sits once we reach that statementing process? Do you think it's necessary that it mandates adult support, or should the statement be doing something else?
It's fairly straightforward. The statement is a statement of special educational needs and special educational provision to meet those needs. So whatever the provision is that the child needs must by law be specified in the statement in part 3. And if it's not specified, for example, if you say, here's a bunch of group provision that everybody can access, that's not specific and it therefore won't be lawful. Now, one-to-one classroom assistance is not the answer to every question. There does need to be other approaches. I know there are pilots that have been put forward, and we need to make evidence-based decisions. We also need to properly skill up our classroom assistants and really acknowledge what they do on a daily basis. And a lot of schools would just fall apart if we took their classroom assistants away. What is it they're doing? Are they being professionally developed? Are they being properly paid? Are their terms and conditions good enough? What else can they be doing? Can they do things differently? Can they be deployed in a different way? The important thing is that there's honesty and truthfulness about what the child is accessing, so that whatever they're getting, whatever that looks like, is specific on the statement, and then if the parent doesn't agree with it, they can appeal it and an independent tribunal can scrutinise it. Now, if we're in a more secure position where there are a number of options and they're working for children, parents are not going to be one bit worried about what it says. They'll be more than happy if their child is getting what they need. The reason there's such a focus on one-to-one classroom assistance, and we focus on it a lot, is because that is the only thing you can get at the minute that you can enforce, and you can hold that piece of paper and say, I'm entitled to this and I'm not getting it. So we do need to move away from that to a point, but we must still specify in statements, and if there's work ongoing about how we do that, we'd like to be invited to that table, please, as to how that should happen.
So if the EA, as they said in evidence sessions, that they are looking to develop a new model of support for children with a statement, it's important then that organisations such as yourselves, and I would imagine parent advocacy groups and all that are involved in around what that should look like.
And I think where we can come in is we have an understanding of the law, because at the minute the Education Authority does not comply with the law very often in drafts of statements. I mean, I don't think any of us have ever seen a draft statement that we said, oh, that's grand, you don't need any to edit that. We have always had to advise to tighten up the specification. So, we're spending a lot of time doing that, and the EA spending a lot of time taking calls from us and SENAC and the Children's Commissioner and everyone else who's looking at this. And they could cut out a lot of unnecessary work by agreeing what specification ought to look like and what it's providing you with in a very open and transparent way.
Well, that's really helpful. Look, I'm not. There's lots more I could ask, but there's lots of people around the table who want to ask questions. So I'm going to open up to the floor. I have an indication from Kathy first. Oh, sorry, Deputy Chair first, and then Kathy. Sorry, apologies. I do like to occasionally promote people on committee. Yeah.
Thanks. And Rachel, in your presentation, you flagged up the dangers of repeating the mistakes of the old system within the new system, particularly when it comes to gatekeeping and access to pupil services when needs emerged. So what can be done to avoid making the same mistakes again?
Well, I would suggest that it has to be a child-centred approach. At the moment we have a very process-heavy approach and a lot of bureaucracy, and the teachers are sitting and parents with a child in front of them who has needs, and they can see that there are needs and those need to be identified and assessed, and then they hit a wall of bureaucracy and processes and criteria and things they have to do. It's like a full-time admin job. That's not child-centred. So the hope is that the local impact teams and any other intervention can bring an approach where they're looking at the child to see what they need and that they're providing that. They won't be able to do that if they're not resourced to respond. And the other point is, if the profile of needs changes in the population, the local impact teams and other services need to be able to flex. They need to have some wriggle room in their capacity to respond to changes, which they haven't had up to now. What we don't want to see is the introduction of layers and layers of operational criteria. I think the graduated response framework is in danger of becoming that. I know that's not the intention behind it. The principle behind it is sound, but what happens in practice is a different thing, and I know that we'll talk to that at some point today. No child should be leaving a system where they've been referred for help without some sort of a pathway. And very often we just get a no, you don't meet the criteria, have a nice day. Then we'll just request a statutory assessment, we'll probably get it, and then you'll be into the statement en route. So no child should be leaving without some sort of help. And the other thing we need to do is really maintain specialism. I know the sensory service has managed to preserve its specialism. It's stayed outside the LITs. Across the LITs, they don't have full specialism in place in every area. We need to make sure that people who are providing help to children are specialists and know how to advise the school, the parent and the child, how they can improve their situation. And it needs to be outcomes focused, which I think is the intention. But ultimately I come back to, if it can't meet capacity, we're going to be completely repeating what we did before.
I suppose even in terms of pathways, when it's clear the child does need a pathway, it doesn't always happen that the EA provides that. And take the case that you were the great advocate for yourself, Aurelia's case. It was known from she was a baby that she was going to need support right through her whole school career, and yet that wasn't done, and she missed many months of schooling because the EA hadn't made the preparations for her pathway. Do you think that's still a problem, or if it is, how can that be resolved?
It's still a problem. I have a whole list of cases here, and I'm conscious that my colleagues will have a lot more important things to say as well about cases, but I have a list of cases here that I could tell you about of children with complex disabilities who haven't been able to access their schooling because they don't have a registered nurse to look after them, or they don't have access for a wheelchair. And I'm glad you mentioned Aurelia, because Aurelia is a very insightful young woman, and she said to me recently she would never like to blame the people in the EA who are working on the coalface trying to sort everything out for everybody. And she hadn't heard anything that was said at last week's evidence. She wasn't aware of it. So it's not their fault. They're working very, very hard and they've got too many cases. And I'm just a burden. I'm a burden. So she's been left feeling that she's a burden.
Well, that's an indictment on the whole system.
It is. And it's so sad. And that's a couple of years later, because she's in third year now. So it leaves a scar, it leaves a mark, it leaves harm and damage. And we have together collectively numerous cases of children who still aren't in school so far this term, and are they feeling that they're a burden? They're not wanted, they're different, they're not quite as good as everybody else. So yeah, it's a good point you raise, and happy birthday, Aurelia, if you're watching this. Yeah.
I just want to ask you one other question in regard to provision within the Irish medium sector. And we've heard evidence from the Irish medium sector. We spoke yesterday to one of the Sankos from College to First Year, and it's clear that there isn't bespoke provision for children who are involved in immersion education. And the Sanko told us, about the educational psychologist coming into the school and saying, "Oh, this is great the way the kids can speak Irish and blah blah blah," but there's obviously been no training given to that psychologist on immersion pedagogy. And it's also the case that where there is special provision for literacy in English medium schools from primary 2, because there's no bespoke provision for Irish medium, that doesn't kick in until primary 4, because that's when children in Irish medium schools start learning English. So there are all these issues in regard to Irish medium. What do you think can be done about that?
Yeah, there are inequalities inherent in that, particularly when you have a duty to promote Irish medium education. It comes back to the point about specialism. You need the appropriate specialisms across the system to deal with children's individual profiles of need. If a person's immersed in Irish and Irish is their first language, it's not much use going in to assess them in a different language, because you're not going to get the right evidence back to inform the assessment. So I think the answer to the question is to ensure there's appropriate specialism and appropriate diagnostic assessment tools in place that can be done in the Irish language, particularly in those earlier years when children aren't learning English. So interventions obviously have to be tailored to the specific needs of the child and the profile of the population. So that comes back to planning again, and also consultation, because only those probably in Irish medium can really explain what's needed, similarly to those who are disabled can explain what's needed, and we need to speak to the affected people to know this.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. And now I'll bring in the newly appointed Deputy Chair, Kathy.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I want to start off by saying, Rachel and the rest of your team, thanks so much for everything that you do, not just for today's session, but I know that you guys are a lifeline to so many families that are out there. So just to put that on record at the outset. Rachel, in your evidence, you mentioned there a few times around, in theory, how this, everybody wants this to work. And in theory, it does sound like they're doing the right things. However, the reality of it is so much different. And we're hearing that from schools themselves, but we're also hearing that from members of the lit teams as well, and their own difficulties in trying to operate in this space. And that's, I suppose, why we're so, when senior EA officials come in, we're so trying to get them, will you just listen? Will you please listen to what's actually happening out there on the ground? So thanks for your presentation, because it really reiterates that. I wanted to ask around, specifically around the pathways, if possible. So what we are being told is that there are actually now already more children actually getting support, and getting more one-to-one support through these pathways. Now, evidence that we're hearing is saying the polar opposite of that, and the children are not getting the one-to-one support. So if we use literacy as an example, what's your view on that, or what are you hearing on that?
I think I'll actually ask Liam, our advice manager, to deal with that, because he's a big champion for literacy, does quite a lot of casework.
I have a number of children that I'm assisting, and they are receiving literacy provision, but the literacy provision they're receiving is statutory provision, so we've had to go to tribunals. I was recently out of Sandus in relation to a child, and we secured literacy support, and we also secured that the service wouldn't end until everybody agreed, parents, the school and the service, that the child had made sufficient progress. So it wasn't tied in to this 12-week model. Then you get that, and no matter what you've done, you move on, and then you start at the back of the process again. So we're able to secure that. But interesting in relation to that, at that tribunal, only about 6 weeks ago, there seemed to be confusion among the EA staff, where they're including some lit staff, that whether or not you get actually access to types of support at the same time from the lit team. So obviously everything's very, very new, and you're only sort of dealing, there's one case that I'm dealing with at the minute where I'm advising the parent in terms of a complaint to the Board of Governors of a school, because one of the things that we're concerned that may happen is, because of this new bureaucracy and new forms and new online stuff, that schools, there becomes a reluctance to deal with it, that there's a turn-off factor with it. So in this case, this child had a number of difficulties, each one on their own, potentially a special educational need and a learning difficulty, but the list that this woman was given for her child to go to the GP because he hadn't got a diagnosis, and it was one of those cases where he doesn't have a diagnosis, there's nothing we can do. Yeah. But he clearly had a list of significant difficulties. The school were actually making provision, so he was receiving some one-to-one support from a classroom assistant. But he wasn't on the SEN register, and he didn't have a PLP. So I wrote to the Sanko, got a response which didn't satisfy me at all. So we're now proceed to a complaint. So I want to dig into that. I want to see, is this a reluctance to engage with these new processes, because that's certainly in a number of conversations I've had with teachers like yourselves, that's the impression I'm getting. There's nearly a fear factor with these new processes. So we don't want, as people have said earlier, we don't want to repeat the failures of the past. I mean, it used to be the case that children sat at stage 2 before they moved to stage 3, and children sat for years, and the emotion that we come across mostly in my 25 years in the centre is parental frustration around the pace that children's needs are dealt with. And I don't want this new system, with all the potential that it has, to become a new model of the old system where the response framework, the lit referrals, all of that become a new block, you know?
Yeah. That's really interesting, Liam, actually, in that specific case as well, because what we're hearing is that there's a lot of children who are in pathway 2 that requires a classroom assistant. The literacy teacher, the EA literacy teacher, would provide support to the classroom, a classroom assistant or a teacher to provide that one-to-one support, but they're not hitting that pathway 3 criteria and not able to get the one-to-one support from the literacy teacher. Now, I want to ask you something, what your view would be on, I've heard a case recently where there's no classroom assistant in the class, there's just a teacher, and the literacy teacher, who wholeheartedly wants to provide one-to-one support for the child, but the system is not allowing her to do it, was told to find a classroom assistant from another class to come in and provide that. There was no classroom assistant available in another class, so we're told to go and find a P7 child to come and provide that one-to-one support. What would your view be on that?
I mean, that
just briefly, Liam.
Yeah, pretty absurd to me. I heard you asking that question of the last week. I mean, I couldn't countenance a circumstance where that would be, anybody would think that would be reasonable. So, you know, it's not something I've come across. But, I mean, obviously those classroom assistants, by and large, in schools are attached to another pupil. So, if that's being taken to provide one-to-one support to a pupil who doesn't have a statement, then that other child's needs are not being met, and we see that time and time again. So, I mean, as somebody who works in the area, I would far rather be, if I had a child with difficulties, I would far rather be a parent whose child is receiving statutory provision, where I've got statutory rights and the EA have got statutory duties, rather than relying on guidance and guidelines. That's just the way the situation, the way the state of affairs is at the minute.
Yeah,
we'll
I'll just
draw a line in there,
just
Kathy,
a comment to say that you know, I'm not in any way blaming that literacy teacher, because I think the pressure they are under to find somebody else to provide this one-to-one support when they wholeheartedly want to provide that support themselves, but the system's not allowing them to do so. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Kathy. David, you'd indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair. First of all, join you in saying happy birthday to Aurelia, and also, rarely I probably agree with Pat that I do think it's an indictment that she feels a burden, but also it's generous sort of view from her that to understand that people in those roles are working to the best of their ability for people who need the help. And I do think just for us it will be a complex challenge in the future, but I think we all need to engage in looking at a sustainable future for a high quality service, but a service to be provided, because I think one-to-one, and I understand why, you know, a parent will fight and want that and will want the statement to be able to say that's what I can access, but I think we all know that that's going to be very challenging in the future, particularly if we do see a rise in numbers again at some stage. But I that's comment. I really have one question. Your briefing's been comprehensive in that regard. It's focusing on what engagement you have had, and we talked last week about trying to maybe bring health officials to this committee, but around, and you've mentioned in your briefing that health has sort of drawn back a little bit from basically their initial commitment or looking around the impact teams. What engagement have you had with the Department of Health officials? Resource is clearly a problem for them. I'm not trying to make a political point around that, but is there a willingness, is there a keenness, is there a push to try and properly integrate, or is it very much being stonewalled? Because when we have education officials here, I understand they seem to me resistant to want to say anything negative about colleagues in other departments.
That's
and
right.
it's not about, again, it's not about personalising it to anybody. It's about the system. And you talked about the potential of the new system. The potential of the new system, the impact teams, is great. But if we don't have those allied health professionals properly integrated into the system, they're not impact teams at all. It's just two departments doing what they've always done.
Absolutely. I'll make a very brief comment and then I'm going to pass to Kathryn because it's her specialist area at the minute. Really, I think there's tension between the different departments because of the resourcing situation and the pressure on all of them. So education wants health to come and help them. Health are probably thinking, well, that's education, why don't you go and do as much as you can? Health actually do a lot in the education space. Education are having a crisis. There will be a proliferation of SPIMs and so on. And then that situation, maybe health don't even know what's going on. How are they going to resource that? So they're just not acting together. I don't think there's an unwillingness. I think they do work together, but I think there's an awful lot more that needs to be done to make it coherent. And there's some very, very complex children with special educational needs who can't go to school unless they have a nurse there with them. I have a child, in fact, there's a child who has a declaration of a breach of her human rights, Alana, who I've spoken to you about before. She can't go to school this Friday because there's no registered nurse available to be there to make sure that she isn't at risk from stopping to breathe. And she can't go to school because there's no nurse available. And that service has been very, very patchy, and all of her respite is basically stopped. So that's one example. I'm going to pass to Kathryn because you might have a further comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we go back and look at what the legal responsibilities and duties are of health, I think it's quite helpful. We have looked at it and considered it over many years. But, I mean, under the 96 order, the education order, there is a clear duty on health trusts under section 14 of that order, and that is to comply with the Education Authority requests and give information and advice within the statutory assessment process, and to guide and support the provision and indeed the review of what's provided in the statement as an ongoing commitment. And the education regs, the SEN regs, the 2005 regs, also deal with the requirement to give medical advices, effective medical advices in that process. And the code of practice, the original code of practice, is extremely clear in terms of the responsibility to cooperate. I mean, it says that it deals with cooperation. It says that effective action on behalf of children with SEN will often depend on close cooperation between education and health trusts who have statutory duties to help one another. So, I mean, that's always been the case, and all the medical evidence is provided within that process. It should guide what's in the child's assessment, what's in the child's statement, and looks at, health can give the proper advice in relation to personal care, in relation to what are the correct equipment and support that should be available to a child in school, and indeed how to manage complex behaviours and all of those other things in the school context. So health have an extremely important role, always have had. If they choose to back out because there's a budgetary consideration or there's scarce resources, I don't think that's appropriate. We would never agree that was appropriate. But more than that, their role is crucial already. But more than that, the Children's Law Centre had an event on the 24th of November looking at 10 years on what the Children's Services Cooperation Act has delivered. It's that was introduced in 2015. We're 10 years on. There has been there's a lot of evidence. We had an event with 100 people there from statutory sector. There were people there from Department of Health, Department of Finance, and Department of Education, who gave very compelling information in terms of very good ongoing collaborative efforts and strategies that have happened. But I suppose the point is, what we see it as an extremely important piece of legislation to bring this further.
Yeah.
And with the SEN transformation agenda and the reform programme, it's an excellent opportunity. It highlights the merits and benefits within the Children's Services Cooperation Act. There's a mandatory statutory duty to cooperate.
And I agree.
Very brief final point.
I agree, and it would be it's an opportunity if the resource is there, and your role absolutely and rightly, and we're talking about health in this regard, but also education, is to push for that child's rights, and look, you can deliver that, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But whenever that hard edge comes up against the hard edge of budgetary issues, that pushes us all into a situation where the person that ends up getting failed is the child. And that's
Well, if I could counter that just to say, and it did come out, it was
very briefly, because we're really running over
very
time
briefly,
on this
but
one.
there is, I mean, that was discussed. The Department of Finance were there. They've issued guidance in April for all departments and public authorities to look at in terms of how to budget, how to get value for money. I mean, and the more collaboration there is, they need to start looking at what are the longer term objectives, what are the gains, what are the financial gains, the economic gains of getting this right. And there is obviously there's a enabling power within the legislation to pool resources and pool funds. Now that hasn't been brought forward with regulations
yet. Just need to draw this one to a close.
I've no opposition
Kathryn, David also,
Thanks
because we have
Chair.
just on this inquiry run substantially over time, just to make sure we get another opportunities for other members to come in. Dana, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it's absolutely heartbreaking that children with additional needs feel like they're a burden on the system, and then have that empathy as well for the people who are on the cold face of it. But those who are feeling them sit at the very, very top. And a couple of weeks ago we did have senior officials in, and they may have thought I was being a bit hard on them when I was talking about reduced timetables, and them saying, well, that's really an operational for schools. I have a completely different view on that, because they have that responsibility to place children with special educational needs, and they aren't placing them properly. They are offering places that do not exist. We do not do that to mainstream children, so why should we do it with children with additional needs? I would like to hear your view on that, because I am sick, sore and tired of senior officials, because I have lost all faith in them.
I think it's fair. I did note the comment that was made that this was a delegated matter for schools, that reduced timetables was a delegated matter for schools, and that's actually incorrect. There are decisions that schools make that they are responsible for, where they've decided to reduce a child's timetable off their own bat. Yes, they're legally responsible for that, and it may well be disability discrimination, an unofficial exclusion, if you like. But actually the majority of cases that we're struggling with at the minute are where the state, through the Education Authority, has blocked the child from attending school. Now, if a parent stopped their child from going to school, they'd be brought to court. If the Education Authority or another Children's Services Authority blocks a child from going to school, they don't seem to be accountable for it. So I have cases here. I have a very vulnerable, looked after child who's in long-term foster care, who missed a year of school and was missing part of this year of school because of lack of health input. And the EA didn't put anything in place as an alternative. So the EA has a mandatory legal duty under Article 86 of the Education Northern Ireland Order 1998 to make alternative provision for a child who for any reason might miss out on school. And these children all fall within that, and the EA has that responsibility. We've got legal declarations against them for refusing to do it. They know that they have to do it, but they haven't put the infrastructure in place other than, say, EOTIS provisions or exceptional teaching arrangements, maths and English. That's not going to be any good for a child with complex needs and disabilities who can't go to school. So there's nothing there for those really disabled children. I've a child who can't go to school yet in P1 because the school won't take them because they have a complex disability and there isn't support there. The EA needs to come in and backfill that or provide support. I have a child out of school in family intervention with social services who hasn't been in school for 2 years plus, and there's still nothing. And I have a paper trail from here to last Christmas of me asking for education for that child, and it hasn't been provided. I have an email in front of me today from my colleague, the mental health solicitor, where the EA is writing to a parent saying, your child has been facilitated to have 2 hours a day in school. Facilitated, as if they should be grateful that their child is getting a whole 2 hours a day in school. And the reason that child can't go to school is because they've got very complex behaviour needs. The environment is small and unsuitable, and the specialist provision's not there to help them. So there's lots and lots and lots of ways in which there are barriers to attendance at school that is state barriers, not the parents and not the children. So I don't accept that it's a delegated matter to schools. I accept that schools have a level of responsibility, obviously, to provide for their own pupils. I do not accept that the Education Authority doesn't hold a legal duty, and they have breached it, and they're breaching it now for lots of people that we're working with.
The other thing is, sorry, Diane.
I was just going to say I've been advising a principal on something which kind of touches upon everything that people are talking about. A child in crisis who has always had difficulties around their behaviour, was supported in school. School recognised the triggers, could manage the behaviour. The child was then unfortunately subject to a serious sexual assault within the community, as a result of which the behaviour escalated and became more of a problem at home and at school. The child was taken into care, so he's currently under the care of social services. He's in a foster placement. The foster placement broke down. This child's attending school. The school is the only consistent source of support, and his siblings are at the same school. He doesn't understand why he has to leave school every day and he has to go to a stranger's house and his siblings have to go home. There was a serious incident in school and the principal felt that she had no alternative really to move to suspension, although she didn't want to have to do that. She called an emergency annual review. He's currently, so at this stage he's out of school. She called the annual review. He's under the care of a psychiatrist, an educational psychologist, a social worker, and the principal and the parents also attended. The outcome of that was that he needs a specialist placement. He's needed a specialist placement for a long time before this assault even happened, but it's just magnified everything. So the principal had supplied all the information and everyone around the table agreed that this is what this child needed. He then, the place was identified and the hope was that he would move to that and then come back into school again after he had the therapeutic input. But the forms weren't correctly filled in. There was some information missing. It wasn't anything vital. The principal was able to provide the information on the day and has subsequently offered every day since to provide this information, but the EA decided that they couldn't move forward with the placement at this time. So the meeting has been rescheduled for 4 to 6 weeks' time. This child is currently in a foster placement which is at risk of breaking down, and if this breaks down due to the lack of foster placements, he's going to be moved out of trust and away from school and away from family. So I think that it outlines the old system and the new system and how there is a duty to cooperate, but it's this child's best interest should be at the heart of the decision-making process, and it's not the bureaucracy that's winning out.
Yeah. Just a brief final comment, and then we'll have to move on.
Right. Well, so there's only a quick then. So, for me, when it comes to placements and reduced, and then there's the result of it is reduced timetables. But when it comes to placements, just briefly, in my opinion, they're playing a numbers game, and I'm not seeing anything changing. Would you agree with me on that?
We don't have time for all that. It was for a final comment. We're way over time.
The key thing is about monitoring it. It's about monitoring and there being a proper duty to monitor why are children, how many children are out of school, including the ones who have a placement but aren't attending because that placement is incorrect or the services aren't there, they haven't been delivered. And in terms of the reduced timetables, that's not being monitored, it's not being regulated, it's not being consistently recorded. And that is absolutely key to work out why is that happening, for how long is a reduced timetable in place, why haven't they adapted and reviewed and changed that, if it is to serve the fact that there isn't a service there rather than to actually holistically support the child and ensure that they are in a phased process where they're going to be there full time, then it's not right. That's the bottom line.
Thank you.
And apologies, Kathryn, you seem to have come in at the end of each member's allocated time and you're getting cut off. Apologies on that. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to ask one specific question first because I don't think anybody else has, but the department has indicated it's going to bring forward some new SEN regulations by the end of the year. So can you give us a view on the impact of that for support for children?
I think that's a very important question because we're busy redesigning a system based on the legislation and the code that we have and the regulations that we have. And now we're told that these draft regulations, revised regulations, are going to land on your desk or possibly our desks as well by the end of this year. It's been years since those were consulted on and we had a number of criticisms of them at the time. I had to dig those out and have a look back. One of the criticisms was that they were changing the format of a statement and diluting the health duties, for example. So it'll be interesting to see what lands on the desk and we're more than happy to come and speak to that at the time. But as well as that, there's a revised code of practice, which to me, when I last saw it, looked pretty much like the graduated response framework. And all of this is operating without ever having coming back here. So I, for one, am very confused. I think the whole thing is overly complicated. There's too many cooks. There's too many things going on. Can we please get this system stable and operating, and let the people on the ground get on with the good work that they're trying to do? But I'll be very interested to see the regulations on the code, but I'm slightly concerned about it at the same time. Is probably the best way I can put it.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned nursing provision, and it's something that members have raised a lot of questions on in terms of nursing provision in special schools. I've asked a question recently to the Health Minister, and he said in the response that all special schools across Northern Ireland can access appropriate nursing provision in line with the identified needs of pupils attending them. You've just referenced an example of Alana, who can't go to school because she doesn't have appropriate...
She can't go on Friday because her it's a Southern Trust case, and the Southern Trust Community Children's Nursing Team is obviously under extreme pressure. And I have another case in the Northern Trust, very similar, and that's the one where the child was out of school for a year. He was in and out for bits of assessments, but he wasn't in school. I think those teams are under huge pressure. There's a report that has come out recently looking at the nursing. You've been looking at that, and I think there's a fair point in that a lot of this could be delegated, and EA education can take on a certain amount of it, and why shouldn't they look after their own children and be trained up to do it with the help of health? But in cases where that healthcare cannot be delegated, which these are, that provision has to be there, or the child can't go to school. So that needs urgent priority. We can't have a situation where I'm going to get a call once a week going, Alana can't go to school, what am I going to do? And I'm taking the nurses to court. Well, that's a waste of everybody's time and energy. The time and energy should go into organising the system properly and prioritising our most vulnerable children. This child has already had her human rights breached by missing all of P1, all of P2 and part of P3. And now they don't want her to go to school on Friday, and her parents can't do the thing they plan to do on Friday. So it's unethical, immoral and unlawful, and we will challenge it.
No, I think that's great to get that kind of clarity from you on that position, because we've gone around the houses with this and there's reports after reports since kicking the can down the road continuously, but you've just highlighted why that has to be a priority, and I think we'll keep asking questions on that until it's done. You've also mentioned, and we've all mentioned this, and it's been a theme of the inquiry so far around the LIT teams and not supporting them and the need for early intervention. We know there are gaps in terms of early years within the baseline of those LIT teams. We also know that kids in non-statutory settings for early years don't have the same access to the LIT teams. Can you give us a sense of if you feel that ought to be prioritised, or what the impact is of leaving a whole cohort of kids kind of outside of accessing that support in the same way as others can?
Yeah, I'm minded to remember what Gillian Cuthbert had said about trying to rebuild the plane while she's flying it, and I totally get that. Because if you're putting a lot of resource into LIT teams, are you missing out on the early end of it? But you need to get in early to stop them coming to the LIT teams. It's a vicious cycle, but it absolutely is crucial that children are caught before they ever come near the school. If they have got issues, health need to be flagging it up. They need to have provision early. It shouldn't matter what setting the child's in. If they have needs, they should be identified and those needs should be met, because it's going to save a lot of time, energy and money in the long run. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Absolutely, the early years should be a priority. I recently had the benefit of Solihull training. I think it's called togetherness training or something now. If you ever get the chance to do that, it really shows you how important it is to help parents when they're thinking about having a child, when their child is in the womb, when the child is born. The minute the child is born, everything that has to go in to make sure the provision is there. And what happens if something needs help, the child needs help for some reason, the help needs to be there. And if we don't correct that, we can't be asking questions about why children are needing statements and one-to-one classroom assistance, because they didn't get the help when they were wee babies.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, we done training earlier on in the year for the allied health professionals, and worryingly they were saying they were being advised not to refer children who are obviously going to require statements, and it goes to Donnie's point earlier too about reduced timetables. So children arriving at P1 with complex needs who haven't been assessed don't have the additional provision, so obviously schools can't manage their needs. Allied health professionals were being advised not to put those children forward for statutory assessments until the term before they start school. So there's never going to be, the provision's never going to be in place by the time the school year starts for those children. I mean, children can give a statutory assessment from the age of 2. So, I mean, our position will always be that as early as possible, get them assessed, find out what their educational needs are going to be, so when they start formal education, things are in place. Because if it's not, it just builds up and builds up for more complexity and more increased provision down the line. So I was worrying that that's what they were being advised, you know.
Final comment, yeah.
It was more just to close the loop on the resourcing issue. Just, I think you contributed to the CINE briefing that we had. They highlighted the difficulty with lots of pilots in the system. I always look at this right now in terms of the CERN crisis as wartime and peacetime, and it's like wartime, just services go for the boots on the ground, the things that you need to deliver for the kids. Pilots is for another time when there's maybe a bit more scope. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
I think you're right.
Very brief response.
Very brief. I think you're right. We need to have structural change, not little projects going everywhere. The pilots provide evidence. Yeah. So some pilots are great and then they stop them and you don't see them again. But ultimately it's structural change that's required.
Thank you. John, you're next.
Yeah, two things. Thanks for all the work you do. The very good briefing. There was 96,000 pupils had chronic or severe attendance issues, which is 3 times the size of Ballymena. Now, schools in England can give, or councils in England can give an £80 fine to parents, almost like a fixed penalty fine, where there's attendance issues. Is that something you would think was positive or negative?
I would not support that in the situation we're in currently. There's 2 categories here, I suppose, from what you're saying. There's parents who maybe aren't doing what they should be doing, and they should be taken to task and helped and supported to get their child to school. The ones I'm asking about, clearly not those who are doing the rest. The majority of the problems we deal with is not that. The majority of the problems that we can speak to is those parents who are trying to get their child into school with every bit of their might and can't. And the other category that maybe fall more into the one you're interested in is people who are from very disadvantaged, impoverished communities who maybe have had adverse experiences themselves and need support to go in to help them so that they can, and I always say to people, if they ring me up and say, education welfare's coming to my door, what am I going to do? I'm saying, open the door and pull them into the house because you need help. And it's given the people the confidence to say, actually, I do need help. I need support. Things aren't going well. There's so many multiple reasons why this could be happening. We need to have an empathetic approach to families. Punishment, I don't think, has worked. I'm not saying that we shouldn't hold people to account, though. I think we have to have accountability in the system.
How would you do that?
Well, at the minute we use the Education Welfare Service to do that. When a child hits a certain threshold, the Education Welfare Service goes out. Now, what I've argued for and what we've argued for as a centre is that threshold should kick in sooner. So you shouldn't wait till a child's got an 85% attendance rate. If it starts dropping, to a low level, say even to 90% or 89, 86, 87, why is it dropping? Go and find out now. Don't wait till they've been out of school and the pattern's established. Once you start to see it, you need to nip it in the bud.
The small number of parents who just won't engage and just aren't doing, and we know children who are not at school, they're higher risk of neglect, abuse, all kinds of things. Okay. Do you think there's any stick?
That's where the court process comes in. They can be brought to court, and they are brought to court. Yeah.
Okay. I'll move on. One other thing is, and this is a tricky issue. It's not a judgment on children. We do have.
Is any issue not tricky in this?
They're all tricky. Yeah. They're all tricky. Children, teachers getting injured at school. Okay, particularly a problem in primary schools, and the first couple of years of primary schools. So, I got some figures that I think it was 250 teachers in primary schools were injured in 2024. This year it's going to be north of 350. It's all primary schools basically, 95%. If you give an example, January this year there were 50 teachers injured in schools in Northern Ireland. All 50 were in primary school. Now, primary school teachers who teach children in mainstream schools who have special education needs aren't trained in team teach for de-escalation and don't have access to things like bite guards and spit guards.
I just say we will not support bite guards or spit guards.
That was the question. Would you support bite guards or spit guards?
Absolutely not. There are protective measures. A couple of things there. It's an important question that you ask because our workforce is very important and we don't want to go into work, any of us, and be injured. Absolutely not. The types of cases
50 a month are.
Yes, they are.
So tell me how you prevent that.
And we know that because they call us.
By putting an intervention earlier,
yeah.
That's the problem because the help isn't given when it's needed. it would minimise a lot of the damage that's done.
Children are being I have an example where a child is inappropriately placed. They're kicking, they're lashing out, they're doing everything. We've got a pregnant teacher who's maybe about to be injured, and the school has a responsibility to safeguard their own teachers in that situation. It turned out that that child should have been in a special school, but they were in a mainstream school. So the problem we talked about over this side of the house was about inappropriate placements. You start inappropriately placing children with complex, challenging behaviour, psychosocial needs, autism and meltdowns, and you put them in the wrong environment without the support, and they start lashing out. Don't be surprised. But there are measures that the LITs should be coming there and bring behaviour support in, etc. But I think you do make a valid point about the lack of training in manual handling and so on. And we're still waiting for guidance on restraint and seclusion, which we don't have, all of which would support schools in managing that
I want to
situation.
just press you on this, because in any given situation in life, we can say intervene earlier, etc. But in the here and now, you have a child, right? And let's face it, some of the schools have glass removed in case a child puts their hand through it because they become dysregulated. So we're not talking about any judgment in children. But you have 50 children, 50 teachers in January this year were injured, many of which would be preventable. Smashed teeth, broken bones, concussed.
I've seen this with my own eyes. I've seen teachers with
injuries. In the here and now, when the child has become so dysregulated that they are a danger to themselves, another child or a teacher, you're opposed to the teacher having access to a bike guard that's simply to prevent the teacher. They
do use what you're describing is like
Rachel,
a policing type
complex
intervention
issue.
there.
Rachel, I can just it is really complex, so I want to give you the chance to answer, but it would just, if we could provide the answer, and then we'll have to move on just in the interest of time.
For example, autistic children who tend to bite, there are guards that the teachers can wear on their arms, and they should tie their hair back. There are measures and mitigations already available like that.
Teachers have those mainstream schools, primary school teachers?
Well, yes, they should have. But what you have to do in that situation is pause. You cannot allow a child to behave like that in a school environment. It's not safe for the workers there. So you'd have to pause, have an emergency meeting, and decide what to do to prevent any further accidents or injuries happening to that teacher. It would be negligent to do otherwise. So, and then you would have to sort out what to do for that particular individual. I don't think it's as simple as giving equipment. I think equipment has a place, potentially.
I'm told they don't have the bike guards.
Pardon me?
Do you think they should have access to bike guards, which are to protect the teacher? It's not putting anything in the child.
There is access to guards that you can place on. It's nearly like a cricket set, if you like.
Mainstream schools that teach children who have special education needs.
I think it'd be very reasonable to put that. I mean, it's just a piece of equipment. You can just get it.
The school to provide it, really.
I think,
yes, but there's no guidance or support or training.
No, there isn't. I think that's a fair point.
The training is key. And the other thing that's absolutely key is that there is a dearth of placements available for children with complex and challenging needs. And we deal with a lot of children who have a range of needs. So they may be autistic, they may have very challenging behaviours, they may have severe learning difficulties and mental health problems. So there would be a whole range of things. Those children cannot be managed in a mainstream environment. Very often they can't be managed in a special school. Yeah. And we're looking at a very, very, very small number of placements. We're looking at children who are going to have to go out of jurisdiction in order to access educational placements and specialist health placements. And that is something that needs to be a priority. It needs to be a priority. Those children need to be given appropriate support, and that does not feature in any of this transformation programme very specifically.
Just to close, so I keep myself
John,
right.
I'm just going to come in because I really do need members to work with me, and also witnesses. If when I say we're bringing an inquiry to a close, I really do need it too, because I think we've now had maybe 3 or 4 back and forths on this. So I do understand these are all really important and really complex issues, and it does just it is difficult to cover everything. John, I think in the interest of fairness, I'll allow you a final comment just to close it, and then we will need to move to the next member.
Judgment on the children. I'm just talking about teachers who find themselves, probably through faults in the system and resourcing, in a here and now crisis that they have to manage. Yeah. And in my view, if it's a matter of them being given the guidance, training and equipment to simply put on a bike guard on their arm so they can move a child without getting bitten, that's entirely
I think
reasonable.
You're correct. There's more complex children in our mainstream schools, and that the guidance and support needs to be there for the workforce. I would entirely agree with that.
Thank you. Yeah. We should maybe just highlight, I know from some engagement with special school principals and the EA that there's a new protocol has been put in place in terms of when an incident crosses over a line in a special school environment where there's an acknowledgement that things were not handled well and that the school is not sure how they can continue to safely facilitate the child in school. There's a protocol now of the EA arranging multi-agency meetings as a rapid response to that, but I think whether that needs to be extended out to mainstream schools, because I think
that's a fair point.
I think
yes.
the issue.
And there's preventing violence at work guidance being developed as well.
So I think it's welcome that the EA have acknowledged there are scenarios where schools really want to ensure the child can remain in school, but that is butting up against, as you say, the safety at work considerations, but that the feedback from special school principals I think has been fairly positive, but as you say, the complexity of need is wide now. Okay, Cara, your last indication there, and then that's us.
Thank you, Chair. You and the panel will be happy to know I just have the one question. Folks, thank you so much. Every time you come here, we see your passion and we always learn something new. So thank you for everything that you do. You've definitely helped many constituents over my number of years as an MLA. I just have one question, which is around the processes of getting a child an assessment. And what I've noticed is a lot of the times we'll have parents who have autism or ADHD themselves going through navigating what can feel like a really tiring process of getting a statement, and they really struggle with knowing their rights, knowing how to move forward with the right to appeal, the right to a tribunal, and I see it time and time again. And I just wanted to ask you the question of, is there more that we can do with regards public messaging of the different pathways for an assessment? I've spoken with parents this week who are like, I have to speak with social workers, I have to speak with educational psychologists, and they really do find it overwhelming. Is there more that we can do as a committee to really help simplify what can often feel like a complex process?
You can refer them to the Children's Law Centre and we'll talk through it. We actually have a parent care information leaflet that we drafted for this reason, and it's on our website, and we're happy to share it with the committee. And we use that to try and explain about the different stages and what they need to do, and that, you know, your worries and your concerns are valid, and listen to your intuition, that sort of thing. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone. I would say to anyone who's listened, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask, but it's those vulnerable people who don't pick up the phone and are afraid of maybe of authority or a law centre. They need to have the information available. Probably on the EI website is a good place. You know, there is quite a lot of information on there, but I think we're all flummoxed at the minute with the amount of information and trying to navigate it. But the rights are very straightforward, actually. It's the operational system that's making it complicated. But that hopefully that leaflet would be helpful, so we're more than happy to provide it to you.
Yeah, I mean, guiding parents through the statutory assessment process will be one of the most common pieces of advice and pieces of work that we do at the centre. And interestingly, it's a statistic which I always mention, and you'd mentioned about appeal rights in relation to statutory assessments. So parents are often put off by thinking an appeal is a big complicated legal process. But in relation to appeals to the Special Education Needs and Disability Tribunal, in the past 5 years, where parents have appealed, parents have been successful in 99% of appeals. Wow. So by exercising your right of appeal, you're more or less guaranteed to get provision. That's a statistic that I always like to tell people. You know.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And is that something you would get a lot of? Is a lot of people coming to you being like, where do I begin? Where do I start?
Absolutely. All the time, every day.
82 years.
We're very weary looking. That's certainly a large amount of experience, but no, that helps answer my question. And if anybody could forward that on to myself, I'm just dealing with a number of parents for some reason specifically this week who felt like they're just climbing up a hill. So yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you all very much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cara, and you all look very, very fresh for your 82 years of work in the sector. Donna, you want to just make a quick comment?
Point on the back of a car, it's 99%.
99%, Donnie. Imagine if that was criminal law. Imagine
the EA officials holding their heads in their hands
of criminal decisions were wrong on appeal. You know, it'd be public outroar. But children was saying 99% of the EA decisions that are appealed are turned out
why are we getting to that stage?
I don't think we've timed it to get into this issue now. Rule that one out at this stage. Look, apologies if anyone felt evidence was rushed there. I know there is just so much in this, and we find always with saying that even when you try and narrow into a theme, it's almost impossible to do that. So really appreciate your evidence, and we will absolutely that will be being fed into our inquiry report and recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and members.
Thank you. It was great.
So, members, before we close that item, is there anything other than logging all of that for the inquiry evidence? Is there anything in particular that anybody wanted to pick up? I wasn't aware of any requests for information that we need to follow up on, unless there's anything.
Maybe send those figures I got in about injuries.
If there's anything you want to feed in through the clerk, and then we can take it from there, that's absolutely fine.
I think it's very significant that what you're hearing really does contradict what we've been hearing week on week from many officials, whether it's DE or EA as well. I mean, it's not good. Like,
well, to hear from DE, which we'll come to. No, absolutely, really helpful counterpoint to what some of the evidence that we have had so far. I was particularly struck by the numbers of children on the SEN register are actually static. It's the numbers of statements that are rising, and I'm not sure that has always come through, and that does speak to where are the blockages in the system that's driving that. So I thought that was really helpful evidence. Okay, I'm probably going to not be particularly well received for this, but I am going to propose we power through here to the next item on the agenda. So if anybody has a strong objection to that in terms of being able to get through the next section, I'm looking at faces around the table. Okay, we'll have a very brief comfort break if we can just turn off the live feed. And I'm really just suggesting as soon as we have
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.
Okay, members, so that is us back into open session of the committee, and we're at item 8 on the agenda, which is an oral briefing by DE officials on the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act. So it would refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk, page 107, departmental briefing paper at page 34 of tabled papers, and then further DE papers at pages 109 to 122, and there is a hard copy of some material sent through on the Addressing Bullying in Schools implementation team, which members have got probably for future reference. So very happy to welcome Claire McClelland, the Director of Raising Aspirations and Supporting Learning within the department, Michael Leonard, Head of Additional Educational Needs team within the department, and Maria Coogan, Head of the Addressing Bullying in Schools implementation team within the EA. So you're all very welcome, and apologies for having kept you waiting. I think probably without further ado then I will hand over for initial presentation of up to 10 minutes, and then we will move into question and answer from members. So over to yourselves.
Thank you. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to provide the committee with an update on the work that the Department and the Education Authority has undertaken in relation to the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act. We have circulated a briefing paper, and we've also just provided the clerk with copies of a host of resources developed with over 600 school leaders, which I trust will be helpful. So I'm Claire McClelland, Director of Raising Aspirations and Supporting Learning, joined by Michael Leonard, who is our Head of Additional Educational Needs team, the team responsible for bullying policy, and also Martina Coogan, who leads the Addressing Bullying in Schools implementations team in the Education Authority. EA's Addressing Bullying in Schools team is funded by the department, and the role of that team is to provide support for all schools, education settings, young people and parents to help them understand the requirements of the Act, and it seeks to embed cultures that eradicate bullying type behaviour. DE officials briefed the committee on addressing bullying in May 2024. At that committee session, much of the briefing focused around gathering of data in relation to bullying type behaviour in our schools. Since then, we have made good progress in that respect, and I welcome the opportunity to provide an update on the work that has been carried out. However, I would like to begin by acknowledging the importance of the environment in which our children learn and grow. Schools should be places of safety, of inclusion and respect, and spaces in which every pupil feels valued and supported. Yet for some, bullying is a damaging reality. It's within this context that the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act Northern Ireland 2016 was introduced. Coming into operation in September 2021, the Act provides a statutory definition of bullying, focusing specifically on pupil-to-pupil behaviour. It recognises that bullying can take many forms and that it may be motivated by a wide range of factors. Crucially, the Act places clear duties on boards of governors, requiring them to develop, implement and regularly review addressing bullying policies. Schools must now record all incidents of bullying, including the motivation and outcome, ensuring that responses are not only appropriate but also traceable. While the Act establishes a clear framework for addressing bullying, it also preserves the autonomy of schools to tailor their disciplinary responses to the specific needs of their pupils and the wider school communities. This flexibility ensures that schools can remain responsive and sensitive to the local context while upholding the statutory obligations set out in the Act. This legislation has marked a significant shift in how bullying is addressed, not just as a disciplinary issue, but as a matter of safeguarding and well-being. It empowers schools to take a proactive stance, encourages engagement with pupils and parents, and promotes a culture of openness and accountability. In September 2022, the Department established the Addressing Bullying in Schools team within the Education Authority, and this team plays a key role in helping schools and education settings understand and meet the requirements of the Act. While the primary emphasis is on preventative education and promoting whole school approaches to addressing bullying, the team also offers direct support to schools, parents, carers and young people in responding to specific incidents. This dual approach, both proactive and responsive, ensures the needs of the school community are met. Moving to data. So while the Act requires schools to record the motivation behind substantiated bullying-related incidents, they are not obliged to share this data with the Department. This is due to concerns raised during the legislative process that around centralised data collection and the fact that that could lead to misinterpretation or misuse of the statistics. As you will recall, many of the questions at the last oral briefing about addressing bullying related to the lack of data. In response to this, and acknowledging the importance of robust data in shaping effective policy, the Department has initiated several measures to address existing gaps. High-quality, comprehensive data will allow the Department to understand the prevalence, patterns and impact of bullying in our schools. It will help identify vulnerable groups, track changes over time and evaluate the effectiveness of interventions. Without accurate data, policies may overlook key issues or fail to target the root causes, leading to ineffective or misdirected efforts. Good data also fosters accountability and transparency, ensuring that addressing bullying policy and actions are grounded in evidence and responsive to real-world needs. In the context of this briefing session, which is focused on the post-legislative scrutiny of the implementation and the impact of the Act, comprehensive data is key to providing the evidence base to enable a fuller assessment and oversight of the implementation and effectiveness, and subsequently to inform future policy making. On that note, I'm pleased to share some key findings from the Northern Ireland School Omnibus Survey, which this year we included targeted questions to assess awareness, implementation and impact of the Act across our schools. Encouragingly, 97.7% of schools reported that staff and leadership are aware of their statutory duties. 3/4 believe that the Act has improved awareness of bullying-type behaviours, though some schools did note challenges, particularly around the administrative burden and the definition of bullying. All 220 schools who responded confirmed compliance with the core requirements by adopting the legislative definition, maintaining addressing bullying policies and recording incidents. Most engaged governors, pupils and parents in policy development. However, the survey did flag that while 77.9% of staff from schools had received training, only 46.1% of Board of Governors had. Over half schools recorded fewer than 5 bullying incidents, with verbal and written bullying being the most common. Peer relationship breakdown was the leading motivation, cited by 81.9% of schools. The Department also engaged with the Education and Training Inspectorate to review how schools are implementing the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act. In June, the ETI carried out focused visits to 19 post-primary schools, speaking with staff and pupils, reviewing policies and observing lessons. They also surveyed nearly 8,000 pupils across primary and post-primary. The findings from this are positive, with schools deemed to show a strong commitment to addressing bullying, with systems in place to monitor and record incidents, while 95% of the schools had undertaken staff training and kept governors informed. The findings also showed that virtually all schools had engaged with the Addressing Bullying in Schools team, with feedback about that support being positive. The results from ETI surveys with pupils showed that 99% of primary pupils and 94% of post-primary pupils said they feel safe in school. Most know where there are adults they can talk to if worried, and while primary pupils are largely confident in their school deals well with bullying, post-primary responses showed some room for improvement. To supplement these findings, the ETI will visit primary schools in January to review governors' actions, with a full report expected in February. Overall, these findings show that schools are successfully implementing the Act, with impacts felt by pupils. However, they do also highlight where we can do more. As part of the ongoing collaboration with the Addressing Bullying in Schools implementation team, the Department has worked to ensure that the data we receive is not only relevant, but reflective of the work being carried out. Reporting has moved to an outcomes-based assessment model that simply doesn't count activity, but measures the impact of that work. This change, supported by regular oversight meetings, has improved the quality and the depth of the data we collect, and this is important because it means our policy decisions can be shaped by timely, high-quality evidence. It also enables our policies to be informed, responsive and grounded in what actually happens in our schools. In 2024-2025, nearly 11,000 school staff and allied services took part in an introductory online training. 625 school leaders took part in the 8-module comprehensive leadership programme delivered by EA. Of those school staff, governors and professionals who completed the feedback, all of them, 100%, indicated that the training positively impacted on their ability to address bullying-type concerns more effectively. To deepen our understanding of bullying in Northern Ireland, we are working with the Education Authority to digitise the Bullying Concern Assessment Form. Developed by the Addressing Bullying in Schools team, this tool supports schools in assessing and responding to bullying incidents. Through the EDIS programme, the Bullying Concern Assessment Form will move online, enabling anonymised regional data to be shared. This will give us clearer insights into bullying patterns and help shape more effective policy responses. while taking on board the concerns raised throughout the consultation. While full implementation may take 2 or 3 years, this collaboration marks a significant step towards a safer, more inclusive school environments. To strengthen our approach, the Department is a member of OECD Informal Working Group on Bullying and Wellbeing. This collaboration allows us to share and learn from international best practice. The OECD draft report entitled Bullying in Education, Prevalence, Impact and Responses across OECD countries highlights key recommendations which include the need for clear definitions, shared responsibilities and practical guidance, building staff capacity through training, adopting whole school approaches involving families and communities, ensuring targeted support for victims, and developing ongoing monitoring and evaluation processes. Through the work of the Addressing Bullying in Schools implementation team and our broader departmental initiatives, Northern Ireland is already aligned with many of these recommendations, positioning us favourably amongst OECD regions in tackling bullying. All of these initiatives are greatly improving access to reliable, detailed data, an essential foundation for understanding the implementation of the Act and development of the effective policies. Quality data helps us understand how bullying occurs, the trends, and how we can measure impact and support vulnerable groups. It also enables progress in tracking and evaluation of the current interventions. Robust data ensures that these strategies are evidence-based, targeted and responsive, while also promoting transparency and accountability. In closing, the Department has been able to make significant progress since the committee was last briefed on this issue. We have been able to gather more comprehensive evidence and rich data to better understand the implementation and the impact of the Act. While more can be done, the available and emerging evidence shows high levels of compliance with the Act and strong evidence of the impacts of implementation. The Act has undoubtedly helped provide greater consistency in how all schools respond to bullying incidents and allegations, thus ensuring pupils are being protected to the same best practice standards. The legislation has therefore helped build on the school's duty of care for their pupils and to strengthen the protection pupils can expect if they experience bullying type behaviour in schools. I'd like to finish by reaffirming the Department's commitment to fostering school environments in which every child feels safe and respected and supported. The Addressing Bullying in Schools Act stands as a vital step towards that goal, and by ensuring that bullying is tackled with consistency, transparency and accountability. High quality data will play a central role in helping us understand the impact of this legislation, guiding future improvements and ensuring that our efforts are both effective and evidence-based. And we're very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Claire. And look, it's good to get a briefing following on from the last time you were here. There's clearly been a lot of activity in this space, and the issues around the particularly the data collection. There does seem to have been really substantive work there, and that's really welcome. Other members may pick up on the data a bit in more detail. I wanted to ask just a couple of questions around the Boards of Governors aspect to this. That was one of the areas that it was highlighted that in terms of training around bullying in schools and the implementation of the Act at school level, it was 46% it was coming in at for Boards of Governors, so a substantial, so a majority of schools potentially Boards of Governors not having had that training. Can I ask what is likely to be done to address that, and what, if any, concerns with that flag from the Department's point of view, or indeed the EA's point of view, in relation to how these issues are being dealt with at school level?
So in terms of the governor training, we recognise that there is more to be done. And in response to that, the Addressing Bullying in Schools team launched refreshed governor training to coincide with Anti-Bullying Week. And there has been more proactive work to try and encourage more governors to take part in that training. So in response to that, and recognising that maybe there isn't the uptake that we would like to see in governor training, we've refreshed and updated that, and are trying to encourage as many governors as possible to take that up.
I think there's possibly also an element of the capacity of the Board of Governors themselves maybe plays into that as well.
Well, maybe leading on from that, can I maybe just ask on that? You mentioned that ETI are going to be undertaking a piece of work next year, which looks like quite a rapid timescale to report back in February. I think it was suggested around really to look at what Board of Governor capacity is like in this area. Can you give us any sense of, once a report does land, would there be a commitment to actually implement some clear actions in this space to get that upskilling at governor level rolled out very quickly?
Certainly, depending on what the outcome of that report and what the findings are, we will take those on board and we'll work with the team in the EA to ensure that those recommendations are implemented and acted on. Obviously, there will be considerations such as budget, such as time of the Board of Governors, etc. But certainly any recommendations that come out of that we will seek to act on.
I just have one other question, just in the same area as well. And like this has come up with other issues and other policy areas. As far as I'm aware, I'm very happy to stand corrected that the department or EA doesn't collect data on complaints that go through boards of governors. So in terms of the nature of those complaints, and we genuinely hope that bullying incidents in school are low incidents, but they're very, very high impact for a child or young person who experiences bullying. So if there are complaints going through a board of governors where a parent or a child or young person feels that it was not handled well, is that something that would ever land on the department's radar to understand what went wrong, what was the nature of that particular bullying incident, what support that individual school may need, but also wider learning for the system?
So absolutely. So we have received correspondence from parents where their child has experienced bullying type behaviour, and in responding to the parents, usually what we do is we set out the complaints procedure, we set out where they have recourse. Of course, they can go to NIPSO, etc. But what we also do is we provide the parents with contact details for the Addressing Bullying School team, but we also contact the team and provide the information of the school, of the pupil involved, so the EA team can actually engage with that school to identify, number one, what is the issue, what support does that child need.
Can I just check for clarity, that's when a parent comes to the department directly, so is there any sort of collection or direct engagement with schools to understand what complaints are going through at board level around this? Because again, if a school gets it really wrong and it doesn't make its way to NIPSO, you could have bad practice happening that isn't getting addressed. Is that something the department needs to look at?
We wouldn't routinely be collecting information on complaints of this nature in schools, but where a complaint does come to our attention, we work with the Addressing Bullying in Schools team to address that, to provide the school with support, provide the pupil and the family with support, but we don't routinely collect information.
That's something you would consider doing? Because I suppose I'm just highlighting a concern, I guess, that, and again, I don't want to focus on negatives. There's lots of good stuff that you presented today, and I really do want to emphasise that. But in terms of complaints landing with schools where things have maybe gone wrong, and that could really represent some real serious harm to a child or young person, do you think there is a need for the department to have that information come into its attention sort of as a routine? So if a complaint comes in bullying, that should either go to the EA team or the department so that everyone understands what the issues at school level look like.
It's not something we've considered at present, but it's certainly something as we review and continue to implement the Act, it's something we could look at, but it's not something that's on our to-do list at present.
Okay, I think from my perspective that would be welcome, but look, I'll leave that at that stage. Deputy Chair, if you want to. If other members want to indicate as well.
Just a couple of short questions. First of all, this legislation was written in 2016, it was enacted in 2021. We know the situation now in schools, social media, messaging apps, more and more children and young people with smartphones and so on. So the nature of bullying has changed over many years, and often it's happening actually outside the school. And I'm just wondering, does the department feel that there may be any gaps in the legislation that need covered as a result of the changing environment?
So whenever the legislation was drafted, it was written with the intention of providing enough breadth to take on board emerging types of bullying. So within the Act, there's a list of types of motivation. They're quite broad and they're quite wide-ranging, but there is the potential for the department, if something new comes up, to amend that. It's not something we've considered at this point, based on the feedback that we have got from schools through the Addressing Bullying in Schools team. The legislation seems to be fairly effective at this point, but if there was something to come up that we did need to change the legislation, of course we'd consider that, but it's not something that has come up at present.
Okay, no problem. And just in terms of what parents are entitled to. Are parents entitled to information about the volume of bullying that might be going on in a particular school that their children attend?
That isn't something that, generally speaking, I think the schools would be providing. Boards of Governors may provide updates to their school community on various things. It's not something schools are required to do. So I don't think would be a situation where a parent would be getting routinely like a report on the scale and the nature of bullying in schools.
Well, let me paint a scenario then. Just for argument's sake, there was a particularly high rate of homophobic bullying going on in a particular school, and a parent who knew their own child was gay wanted to know, was that child the only victim of bullying, or was it fairly widespread within the school? Do you not think that's something that should be released to the parents?
Well, I think if there was an issue with any type of bullying in the school would hopefully be seeking advice from the Addressing Bullying in Schools team to manage that. No type of bullying is acceptable. However, in sharing that information, there's all sorts of considerations, personal data considerations and considerations in terms of different types of complaints, different types of action with other children. So my expectation would be that if there are issues with particular types of bullying, that the school is seeking to address those and seeking to ensure that parents, that pupils are involved in developing the policies and developing the interventions to address those. So rather than saying they have an issue, I would like
Claire,
to see
and that's the best case scenario. But if a parent believed the school wasn't dealing with a particular type of bullying and that there was a high volume of it within a school, should the parent not be entitled to know what's happening in the school?
In that case, if the parent had a concern, they should go through the usual complaints process and the usual process within the school, escalating that through the Board of Governors, etc., etc. So if they have a specific concern about a school and about something happening in the school, there's a process for them to go through. Okay. If there is a specific, if there's a specific school that someone is aware of, or if there's a specific school where a parent thinks there's a particular issue, I'm more than happy to look into that and ask the EA team to engage with that school. So if there's something in particular, really happy to pick that up offline and see if we can put the necessary support in to help.
Thanks for that. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Michelle, you'd indicated.
Thank you. Thanks, folks, for coming in. It's a really, really important issue. I think, as the chair has already said, there may be a small number of kids who are impacted by this, but the impact on them can be so huge and so lasting. So having a focus on this is really, really important. We had evidence just last week from a young girl who left the school system because she was being bullied and she felt the school was not listening and responding to her. I've dealt with cases around this. A child in school, and the school has just dismissed that it wasn't bullying. She's since moved on to another school and is thriving. So there's maybe a problem in there in terms of schools really understanding what bullying incidents are and accurately recording what they are, because I've had instances as well where people are saying it's just friendship breakdown, but when you drill into it, actually it's another issue, and there seems to be a reluctance from schools maybe to capture the true extent or the true reason for bullying. You have talked about the need and an intention to gather anonymised regional bullying data, which I think is a really positive intention through the EDIS system. Can you confirm that will happen, and any kind of timescales when we can start to see some outworking of that?
So in terms of that piece of work, we have worked with Education Authority, and all of the work required, I suppose, to digitise that form is complete. We are just waiting on, I suppose, a time slot in terms of the system for that system work to be done. We anticipate the timescale we've been given could be 2 to 3 years. And I appreciate that is quite a long time. We will keep making the case, and we do keep making the case, and I know Martina continues to make the case to do that as soon as possible, because that will give us access to a much richer, much broader data set, which again doesn't bring in some of the concerns around bullying league tables, etc., etc. It'll give us that system level picture without all of those. Without the challenges.
Yeah. I think it's important to get insights from people who are being bullied as well, and what their experiences are, because some of the data you've provided isn't capturing that. So I think that small cohort, what their experiences are, would be important to get. So in terms of, also actually I'm thinking about it when we're looking at the education system more broadly, this kind of research perhaps into bullying would feed into, we know it's contributing to school avoidance and other issues within the school system. So looking at it standalone, it actually would have much greater impact. So the last time the department actually did any research on bullying was 2011. Are you looking at that now? Have you costed that? Is it something we can expect to see if it's 2 to 3 years to get this anonymised data? Are you progressing any other ways to get insights?
Certainly, in terms of research into bullying, the department, I think 2002, 2007 and 2011, as you said, there was research carried out. We have continued to make bids for that funding on an annual basis to try and take forward some more research. So if funding became available, that's certainly something we would like to do.
What amount are you bidding for? How big is this?
200,000 was the last bid we submitted.
Okay. And just on the terms of research, I think Pat raised the point, and it's an important point, that how kids are bullied now, the platforms for bullying have changed dramatically. Another reason that getting research now would be really, really important to actually understand what that looks like in schools. But I guess a more traditional type of bullying, perhaps in Northern Ireland context, is sectarian bullying. And there was a report that came out from Stranmillis in March, and I was just wondering, in terms of the department's reaction to that, it was really actually depressing to read, to be quite honest. They had school staff saying they thought sectarian bullying is an issue for people today, and 95% said that it was an issue today, still sectarian bullying. 86% of staff said they had witnessed it firsthand. Over a quarter of young people said they had experienced sectarian bullying. So is there anything in particular, in light of that particular evidence base, that the department are doing to respond to that within our schools?
So first of all, we're aware of the report and welcome the external research into that area. My team certainly has looked at the report, and many of the measures and the recommendations are already in place. There's some of the things that I have described to you today. In terms of specifically around sectarian bullying, schools have established procedures to deal with bullying incidents. There's no specific protocol dedicated to sectarian bullying. If there's an instance of sectarian bullying or any type of bullying, it's dealt through that existing framework. Now, what I will say is, if there are specific issues that schools are dealing with and specific motivations, the Addressing Bullying in Schools team very often does give targeted and specific advice and support. But in terms of a school dealing with that issue, they deal with it through that framework. So as I said, we have looked at the report, welcomed the report. Many of the recommendations were taken forward, and there is that support available for schools where that perhaps is an issue.
Thank you.
Out of time.
I was tempted, but I thought you
that's great. Appreciate it. Dana, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Do you have any concerns that the withdrawal of previous trans guidance will have an impact on bullying in our schools, considering the prejudice-based bullying is so prevalent?
So first of all, in terms of the withdrawal of the guidance, the Minister had set out his position in terms of the reasons for withdrawing the guidance, in terms of the lawfulness, etc., etc. But what I would say is, whether there's guidance there or not, bullying of any description or any type is not acceptable in our schools. And whilst the guidance has been withdrawn for the reasons the Minister outlined, there is still support available for schools and for pupils. So, for example, for schools dealing with and supporting pupils who are identified as transgender or have gender identity issues, the Education Authority remains available and to provide advice. We have also made it really clear, if there's something that the Education Authority can't answer in terms of that guidance, in terms of the Minister's policy statement,
no concerns. I don't share his view when it comes to his interpretation of that law and the need for taking away our Equality Act. But do you have no concerns that could raise more to bullying?
Whether the guidance is there or not, bullying in a school isn't acceptable, and there are processes there to deal with that.
No, that's fine. The concerns. See, go back to Michelle's point around the research part of it. That you said 200,000. See, as part of that research, would that take in the look at the drop in attendance? Because I can only anecdotally look at some of my cases that comes through the doors that a lot of children are not going to school, and and bullying seems to be high in that reason for it, building that anxiety. So would that delve into that?
So certainly in terms of any research, we would be looking at the full breadth. We would want to explore the full breadth in terms of the motivations and the reasons for bullying, the impact, but also the outworkings of that. So I would anticipate that research would look at the attendance piece and some of the impacts.
Who are you bidding that 200,000 to? The Minister?
And centrally into the department's finance
Is that
process.
seen as a priority then?
Well, we have prioritised it.
No,
and
but
put
the
it
Minister's not
forward.
prioritising it then. This is a Minister who spent over £250,000 on mobile phone pouches as a pilot, and this is something that we're seeing in our schools impacting our children. If he had a child-centred approach, he would certainly prioritise that research.
Certainly, we have prioritised that. We put the bids forward. In terms of the mobile phone pilot, actually the feedback from the 9 schools involved in the pilot has been really positive, both in terms of pupil well-being, in terms of engagement in class, and in terms of bullying. So whilst he has prioritised that, we will continue to bid for funding for the research.
Yeah. As far as then, because I think I just picked up, you used the sentence of real world needs, and just going on from Pat's bit to online stuff. See, when it comes to the understanding for schools and training and even the legislation, you know, we look at violence against women and girls, the growth of incel culture, coercive control, fake information, artificial intelligence, deep fake. Are we even remotely prepared for that there? Because that is very much prevalent coming through as well through the mobile phones.
So certainly in terms of, well, obviously the addressing bullying piece, but more broadly in the department, we are working with the Executive Office in terms of end violence against women and girls. We have...
sorry, but when it comes to the training, sorry I cut you off, but it's the training side of it, because it isn't about a mobile phone in the school. It'll be when you're at home, and that. Is there an understanding and training for teachers in schools and board of governors to actually say, well, this is a problem? They might start in school, you know, and then relationships, and then it goes off into the home.
Yes.
But it's being driven by fake information. That violence against women and girls comes from that culture of blaming women that our young men are being exposed to because they aren't getting the proper education through RSE in school, and then obviously the growth of deep fake. And that images that'll be shared then.
Yes, so all of those emerging themes are covered and discussed in training. What I would say is there's also resources available, and we continue to update them through the Safer Schools piece of work.
Legislation wouldn't cover that though.
The legislation is broad enough to cover all of those motivations and all of those types of things.
Artificial intelligence, yeah.
It doesn't specify artificial intelligence, but it is broad enough to cover all of those different types of motivations.
You, Danny, John, you'd indicated next.
Yeah, thanks. That was really useful. Did you see if the anti-bullying strategies don't work? Okay, so we end up in a situation where we're in the expulsion. Someone's out of control. A lot of teachers have told me there's great frustration that it's the principal does not have the ultimate say on expulsion. So in a controlled school, the expelling authority is indeed the education authority. Would it not be better to make the principal the final decision maker?
So there was a review a while back, and that's something we're considering the next steps in at the minute. So in terms of suspensions and expulsions, I think one of the challenges raised is that there are differing approaches depending on the type of school. That is something that we have looked at and we've considered. We will put something to the Minister shortly, but the work going forward on that will be subject and dependent to resources, depending on what the Minister decides to do with that and how the Minister decides to move forward. It will require additional resources to implement, to, I suppose, move to a different position in terms of expulsions and the model that's used. It is something that's on our radar, and it is something that we may seek to change in the future, but it's one that the Minister hasn't taken a decision on.
I think I'm told by some teachers that and principals there's an air of a sort of invincibility about some bullies, that they think that they're not going to get expelled, that the school want them expelled, but the education authority are saying no. then that really undermines. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question, but you probably don't have the answer now. How many times has a principal asked for a pupil to be expelled and the pupil is not expelled?
Okay, so I don't have the data to hand. There is an expulsion panel that takes that decision. I can certainly come back to you with that data, and I can ask education authorities, colleagues, what those numbers are. But it is a panel that takes that decision, and they hear evidence from both, I suppose both sides of the story. So they do take on board the views of the school, but they also hear, from the pupil as well. So I can certainly come back to you and ask.
There is an appeal process, which is also a panel. Whereas in a non-controlled school, it's the Board of Governors who can decide.
Yes, that's correct.
But we don't have that trust in schools in the control sector.
And that's what we may seek to address. That's what some of the recommendations.
What's the thinking? I mean, do you trust boards of governors in schools that are non-controlled more than you trust boards of governors who are in control schools?
I don't think that's...
In terms of judgment?
I don't think that's the case. I think it's how...
What's the rationale for the difference?
I think it's how the legislation and how it was set up at the time. And as I said, it's something that we are looking at. How do we, I suppose, ensure consistency across the board?
I just put it on record that I believe firmly that if the principal believes that pupil is beyond the realms of being in that school, for the safety of the teachers and the safety of the other pupils, and for the ability for them to be given good quality teaching, that the principal's decisions should be respected, and that legislation is overdue a change, with the caveat that you have an independent panel to adjudicate if there is an appeal. But I think it's perverse to not give principals that ultimate say around expulsions. So that's on the record. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, John and David.
Sure, sure. I guess I want to touch on, because I agree with some of what, not clearly all of what Danny was sort of hitting that on clearly on the pouches. I'm glad to hear that the schools are seeing them as a positive intervention against the sort of bullying that can come through phones, particularly at least giving children who may come under that threat within their school hours some level of protection and safe space during their schooling. So obviously a different view on that. But I do think that sort of wider piece around the stuff that's outside schools, the stuff that's on the internet, and probably far beyond the reach of schools to provide any serious protection around that. But they can be that sort of canary in the mine that sees an effect on a child, notices that, and flags it up elsewhere. It's an issue I to be honest, I don't even think this place is empowered to really deal with. It has to be at a national government level, dealing with the tech conglomerates that hold the power there. I guess just to invite you to talk about what that interface looks like, how are schools in that initial stage in identifying an issue and pointing it out, where do they signpost, how are they informed about what resources are out there to ensure that stuff that is not their responsibility in terms of trying to police a child's sort of protection outside of school, but they nevertheless have a duty of care and will want to help at the best they can, what resources are there in place and in order to make sure they can signpost the right support in that regard and flag it up the chain.
Okay, so first of all, just to pick up in terms of the mobile pilot, actually the feedback's really been positive from pupils as well.
Yeah.
And we've lots of pupils saying actually how the pilot has, not using their mobile phones or not having access to them during the day has actually made it much better experience in school for them, that they have many more social opportunities, they're finding it much easier to concentrate, etc. as well. So not just the schools themselves and the pupils, and I'm sure some of you will have seen some of the pupils from St Ronan's who were in the media recently talking about the benefits for them. First, so just in your second part of your question, schools are very much a protective factor. So schools are dealing with a lot of the issues that are happening in wider society. And I suppose as a department and the Education Authority, we do try to ensure that they have the tools and the information and as up-to-date information as possible to first of all, be aware of what those emerging issues are, and also how to deal with them. So I mentioned Safer Schools app earlier. The Safer Schools app is free for all schools to use, and there are resources for teachers, there are resources for pupils and for parents. And actually what they're able to do is push out really up-to-date information. So there'll be information on there about emerging trends in terms of AI. There'll be information on there about bullying. The Addressing Bullying in Schools team has also worked with the Safer Schools app to make sure that that bullying information is on there as well. So whilst we can't necessarily deal with all of those issues, what we do try to do is make sure that schools have the information and have the tools to and I suppose the knowledge as far as possible.
I think that's key, because it is one of those fields where actually the children quite often are going to be far ahead of their parents, their teachers, in terms of the knowledge of what's out there in a very fast moving and fast changing world. So that's reassuring. I would just say I think it's an opportunity. Actually, we have had positive feedback from schools, from children as well. I think there's an opportunity for those parties who might have been sceptical at the start of this process to listen to some of that feedback from the people who are right at the coalface, and see that this is a positive intervention against the very things that we're talking about. So thank you very much. Thank you.
David, Jim, on the mobile phones, if I could just make a point. I mean, I think I've always wanted to be clear that I think interventions to get phones out of kids' hands in schools are to be welcomed, but it's whether we need to spend the sums of money that the Minister has put out in it. We are under such a financial pressure at the moment. I mean, we're heading to colossal overspends in the education budget, and to roll out a £250,000 pilot across the school estate would be eye-watering sums of money, and I'm just not sure that we need that tech to get phones out of kids' hands in schools, because they ultimately still have to hand them over to somebody, physically do that, and I'm just not convinced. But I don't think this is the forum
you can make that argument, but I would say you can't say, and you haven't said, but you can't say that the Minister is not prioritising these things at the same time as saying, you know, criticising that. Well, you can say that you think it should be elsewhere, but that is prioritising those measures.
Through the chair, just on the phone pouches, the young people know how to get around that, no bother. And I've heard so many ways of getting around.
No doubt, but I think on the whole, it's a positive intervention.
And nobody's saying the idea isn't, but I think it's the methodology and the cost.
Well, I think we do going off piece a little from
young people know how to get cigarettes, but it doesn't mean we don't have a ban on them.
I think just to draw a line. I think I've been clear in my comments. I think it is positive for kids in school not to have mobile phones in their hands in the classroom. I absolutely do, and indeed at lunch and break, I absolutely do. But I'm not convinced that we need to spend that sum of money to deliver that outcome. That's the point, and that's where there's a difference of opinion. I guess.
I agree though.
When we're in Bangor Academy, they had pigeonholes in the classrooms. You know, cheaper option.
It is definitely cheaper to have a pigeonhole. But anyway, that is great. Look, I really appreciate the evidence, and look, it's good to see that there is work going on this. But I think we definitely still see that there are areas where more needs to be done, and obviously there are resource challenges. We are aware of those. But thank you for your evidence, and apologies again for keeping you waiting.
Thank you.
Okay, members, just before we move on, then, is there anything in terms of any follow up from that at the moment? Yeah, Danny.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the debate. It's to clarify that as well. It's about priorities. When ministers stand in front and say they don't have enough money and they start pointing fingers and blame, you have to point out what priorities that they then bring forward, and they say we don't have the resources to do things. I think that's very important for us to be doing at all stages. And my calculations say that the mobile phone purchase could cost upwards of £6 million with a recurring cost. So you'll never score that.
Initial spend, but I don't think the recurring cost is going to be. You're not buying these every year. You know.
No, but school meals have just went up 50p. Can't get access to music, and the EOTA centres are not going to get referrals. Do you know what I mean?
We can talk about it another time.
All about priorities, and no doubt the outworkings of the pilot will come before the committee, and we'll be able to have all of these discussions with the data and the evidence in front of us. But it is an important issue, without a doubt. And I should note, in January we are scheduled to hear from Smartphone Free Childhood, who I'm sure will have plenty to say on that issue as well. Okay, members, so that takes us on to item 9 in the agenda, pages 125 to 303, and then again page 42 of tabled papers onwards. We have correspondence. Summary note is at page 125, and as normal, it's just anything that is other than the summary note. So items 9.2 to 9.5, that's pages 127 to 157. All submissions to the committee's SEN inquiry. Are we agreed to add those to the inquiry folder for the evidence? Are we agreed? Item 9.6, page 158, correspondence from the TEO committee seeking committee's views on the inquiry into mother and baby institutions, Magdalene laundries and workhouses and redress scheme bill. Would members be in agreement that input will be fed through from parties individually to that in terms of evidence gathering? Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 9.9, page 236, it's correspondence from an individual regarding a complaint that they've registered in relation to EA transport provision for a pupil with special educational needs. So it would need to seek members' views on this. It's not completely clear, and perhaps the clerk can maybe speak to this, if this is a copy of a complaint sent to the EA or a complaint to the committee seeking for us to investigate and address the issues. So I suppose it's just based on what the nature of that is in terms of how we would handle it, but I would want to suggest that we can't investigate an individual complaint, but certainly I would suggest that we would want to be sharing with the individual the evidence that we have taken in relation to SEN transport provision through the inquiry, and advise the individual of the complaints processes available, including escalation to NIPSO should they be unhappy with the response from the EA. But I think in this instance, given the issue does seem to have had a very serious impact, I would want to suggest that we possibly just flag the correspondence with EA, and if the individual is still waiting for a response, to suggest that be provided. Are members agreed in terms of those actions as appropriate in terms of addressing that issue? Agreed? Okay, item 9.10, it's a response from the Department further to queries raised by the committee further to the Permanent Secretary's briefing in relation to the Minister's visit to Israel. So it is noted down to note there in the correspondence note at the beginning of item 9 in your packs, but I did just identify one issue where I think there's maybe a need for a little bit more information, because I don't think it was clear in the Permanent Secretary's briefing when it sets out the correspondence that the department did engage in relation to this trip, that there is a query. It notes a query being registered on whether or not an educational visit was scheduled to take place on the trip. I would certainly like to see more information on that. Was that a query to the Minister to ask if there'd be an educational visit? Was it a query to the Israeli Embassy? And if this wasn't an official visit, what was the relevance of that question? I think is important, and I think whoever that correspondence went to, I think the committee legitimately would like to know what response was received to that query, and again, does it raise any questions around the extent to which this was or was not an official visit, and what the department did in advance about the nature of the visit. So appreciate there's quite a bit in there, but it did seem to me to be matters that weren't covered. That level of inquiry from the department wasn't covered in the briefing. Happy to open up to members, and David, I'm assuming you're going to register, declare your interest. Yes. I'll let you do that now. So
declare that I was on a similar trip, or the same trip as the Minister, but had no role in the Minister's logistics or Minister's decision to go or anything like that. So I don't think it's conflict, but I was in Israel at the same time.
Noted for the record. Thank you for that, David. So I mean that would be my suggestion in terms of how we deal with it, in terms of following up. I do think those issues legitimately require clarification. Do any members have any other views, or would not be in agreement with that course of action?
I agree with what you're saying, Chair. It's just a puzzle to me still how officials can be dealing with the logistics of a private and personal trip that had nothing to do with them, nothing to do with the department, yet they were involved in carrying out that work. So
I think it does certainly raise more questions on that point. I mean, I understand there may well be scenarios, cancelling other items in the Minister's diary, whatever. That's all. It can be understand how that could happen. But I think when it's being presented as not an official visit, questions around is there an educational visit happening in part of this? It feels that those lines have blurred again, so I would be keen to get clarity. It looks like we've got agreement around that. Okay. Item 9.12, page 249, and then also item 9.15, page 42 of tabled papers. They're both related to departmental finances. The first is from the Finance Committee setting out public expenditure outrun and forecast as of October, and the second is a written briefing paper from the department on the December monitoring exercise for 25-26. There's an awful lot in this material, and I think we would be. I think it is necessary for us as a committee to have a look at this, and I would want to suggest that we table this as an item for next week, because we are looking at education's on course to overspend to a level greater than any risks that there were in the health department, and I think that's a serious matter. So I think we should give this agenda item proper attention next week if members are agreed. Agreed. A couple of other bits of tabled papers. There's an invitation that was sent to me specifically requesting me to attend the annual conference of the South Eastern Secondary Head Teachers Association as chair of the committee. So again, I have provisionally accepted as my diary is clear, but I did want to just seek committee agreement that there's a content that I attend, if we're agreed. Great. And then also tabled as a message of thanks from Brian Poots of the Forest School Association. I would want to suggest that we do write to Brian to thank him for his work with the committee and the input into the motion. And also the clerk had kindly suggested that we have the originals actually of the artwork that was done at our event, and I think it would be appropriate to offer those to the Forest School if they wanted to display them. They have a new building, and I think that might be a nice memento for them if members are agreed. Great. Okay. Other than that, are we happy to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 125, subject to those exceptions? Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 10, forward work programme. That's at page 308 of your packs. I think given the hour, I would ordinarily ask the clerk to speak to it, but I think maybe just to speak to the one issue in terms of our briefing for next week, whether has had to be a reschedule, and then we'll note it, I think, from there.
So the SEN briefing on next week is not possible now due to some personal circumstances. And I did ask for the SEN regs briefing in that space because that was offered before, but now that's not available until potentially February. So the department is proposing for next week either teacher professional learning, qualification reform or statutory assessment as a briefing topic. And the qualification reform, some people in the committee have already received in the informal meeting, but not everyone managed to attend. So you might want to ask for that.
I would certainly want to suggest, first of all, I mean, it's been, I'm sure there's good reason why the briefing can't go ahead next week, and that's absolutely fine. I think it's really important we do hear from the department in the new year on the SEN inquiry, and I hope that we do. We've pushed our timescales on for the department, so I hope that those briefings do now proceed. But I would want to suggest, in terms of filling that slot, I think the qualifications review around GCSEs and AS levels is one I think all of us are getting contact around, and there's a lot of concern around it. That there was a lot that we began to cover in the informal briefing, but I don't think we got anywhere near into the sort of detail that we needed to on it. So I'm happy to propose that if members are agreed.
Just it's very short notice. Would there be any possibility of approaching them around the what we talked around food and dinner provision for just in terms of the SEN inquiry?
We could certainly ask. Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of contacted EA about that
originally anyway.
Yeah,
no
problem.
I think correspondence on that issue is in the system. I think in the interest of making sure we do get a briefing that fills the slot of that, I think as they're saying qualifications review, I think pretty much every member has referenced it in some form in this committee. So are we agreed on that? Agreed. Otherwise, are we content to note the forward work programme as drafted?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Item 11 then on the agenda is any other business. Is there any other business? No. Item 12, date, time and place of next meeting, which I should as just is the last committee meeting before we break up for Christmas recess, and that's Wednesday the 10th of December, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And I'll put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Have we agreed?
Agreed.